Are we ready, Jane? Okay. I'll go ahead and I'll call to order the September 20th, 2023 Longmont Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. First order is roll call.
Chairman Poland.
Here.
Commissioner Height.
Present.
Commissioner Tedda.
Here.
Commissioner Goldberg. Here. Commissioner Flagg. Here. Commissioner Lukacs. Here. Commissioner Popkin. Here. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Both buttons are going on at the same time. Is that okay? Is that the one? Okay. Okay. Next item is communications from Planning Director Glenn Van Nimwegen.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the only thing I want to do is introduce our newest planner, Hannah Kangilla, who is here from the private sector and will be presenting your first case. But I did want to at least tell you, we have a great new staff member.
Thank you very much and welcome. Next item is approval of the minutes. First, we'll take the August 16th, 2023 meeting minutes. If there are any comments, questions, or motions. Commissioner Goldberg.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I move for approval of the August 16 minutes.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? Commissioner Popkin.
Just want to enthusiastically thank Jane for the significant effort that went into some of these here. So with that, I will enthusiastically second the approval.
Okay, Jane, let's go to a vote.
Commissioner Height.
Abstains.
Commissioner Tedda.
Abstain.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Aye.
Chair Poland.
Yes.
Commissioner Flagg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lukacs.
Yes.
Commissioner Popkin.
Yes.
Chairman, those pass 5 in favor, 2 abstentions.
Thank you very much. Next item is the August 23, 2023 meeting minutes. Do we have any motions? Commissioner Lukacs.
Thank you, Chair. I move to approve the August 23 meetings.
Thank you very much. Do
Minutes.
we have a second? Commissioner Popkin.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Any other comments? If not, let's take a vote.
Commissioner Height.
Missed that one too.
Commissioner Tedda.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Yes.
Chair Poland.
Yes.
Commissioner Flagg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lukacs.
Aye.
Commissioner Popkin. Chair, that passes 5 in favor, 1 abstention. 6 in favor, 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Popkin.
Sorry, I misheard you on the first vote. I need to change my vote to abstain for the 16th. I was not present for that meeting. Thank you.
It's still
Chairman, that
passed.
still passes.
4 to 3.
4 to 3.
Well,
Correct.
4 to 0 with,
4 to 0
with
3
3 abstentions. Thank you very much. Next item is public invited to be heard. This is a chance for the public to comment on items that are not in front of us or will not be a quasi-judicial item coming up shortly to the commission. We have nobody on the sign-up sheet, but we still do invite if anybody has any comments and would like to come forward. You get 5 minutes. We just ask that you state your name and your address for the record. Seeing nobody come up, I'll go ahead and close out the public invited to be heard. Next item are the public hearings. First item is item A, 1301 Iowa Avenue Conditional Use Site Plan. First up is the city.
Good evening. As Glenn said before, my name's Hannah Kangilla. I work over at the Development Services as an associate planner. Tonight, I'm presenting a conditional use site plan for the commission to review. The property is located at 1301 Iowa Avenue. This application was submitted by Flywheel Capital, and representatives from Flywheel are here tonight to present and will be available for questions for the commission. In the conditional use site plan process, the Planning and Zoning Commission is the decision-making body, ultimately approving or denying such types of applications. I would ask the commission tonight to review the proposed improvements to the site against the review criteria for all application types. Then I'll request the commission hold a public hearing to review any questions the commission has and address any public comments. Lastly, the commission may review the provided resolutions and vote on one of them. Additionally, conditions of approval may be appropriate if the commission finds them necessary for the project to meet the review criteria. The project is generally located here, south of Ken Pratt Boulevard and east of Sunset Street. This is in southwest Longmont. The parcel is zoned for mixed-use employment and is surrounded on all sides by parcels that are also in the MUE zone district. Additional zone districts in this general location are the residential mixed neighborhood, residential single-family, and public facilities, notably where the Longmont Power and Communications facility is located. Adjacent uses on these parcels also include outdoor storage, such as on the LPC parcel and the adjacent CenturyLink facility located across Iowa Avenue to the north. Here's a photo of the pre-improvement condition of the site. The site was previously used for medical manufacturing, and in February of this year, the applicant contacted the Development Services Center and requested a change of use through a site plan waiver. And they changed the use to medium industrial and proposed improvements to the building exterior, the parking surfaces, and the general landscaping. Medium industrial is a permitted use in the mixed-use employment zone district. The applicant also wanted to add outdoor storage to attract more potential tenants. Since the proposed storage areas exceeded 10% of the gross floor area of the principal use, a conditional use site plan is required per the code section 1504-30E3. And why we're here tonight. Here is a diagram of the proposed improvements. The improvement areas are located within the dotted lines. So essentially, improvements include, like I said, resurfacing and restriping of the existing parking surface, addition of parking islands, which are new to the site. These parking islands include landscaping and low-impact development features to help with drainage on the site. The applicant will also fix existing curb cuts and repair and extend the existing irrigation system. They'll maintain existing landscaping and replace a dead tree, as well as create 2 outdoor screened storage areas. They also retain and improve the fire and emergency access to the rear of the building by resurfacing the drive surface. And here's a rendering provided by the applicant. You can see the building improvements on the facade, new landscaping installed in the parking area, and the existing vegetation along Iowa Avenue. The project has undergone 3 rounds of review thus far, and DRC has concluded that the project does in fact meet the review criteria analysis for all application types. The proposed improvements and the use are compatible with the surrounding land uses and will not negatively impact any surrounding properties. Public Works has reviewed the project to ensure that the improvements to the utilities meet code requirements and that there is sufficient access for fire and emergency services on the site. The project has followed the steps for notifying adjacent landowners that are provided in the development review procedures consistent with the conditional use site plan. The initial neighborhood meeting was waived per the planning director, as the surrounding parcels include warehouses and the large city-owned parcel. After the notice of development application was sent out and the property was posted, I have received no comments from the community. After the notice of public hearing, including mailers, a property posting, and a notification in the newspaper, I've received 1 call from an individual expressing interest in attending tonight's meeting. Is that you? Hi. Okay. I made an effort to call this gentleman back. I did not get in contact with him, and I was unable to leave a voicemail. So. Lastly, I would ask tonight that the commission hold a public hearing on this proposal and then consider the 3 resolutions that are presented. Staff's recommendation is that the commission approve resolution 8B, conditionally approving the site plan with the conditions that all items stored in the outdoor storage area shall not be stacked or stored higher than the provided screening fencing. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from the applicant.
First, I want to say I'm sorry for jumping the gun for Hannah's presentation. We did not realize Hannah was new to your team. She's been amazing to work with, as well as Dawn and the rest of the folks at the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Jennifer Grant. I am the principal architect at Quintessence Design Group. I'm joined by John Feffley, who is the senior director at Flywheel Capital, and PJ Danahy, who is the owner of Danahy Development Advisors. We've all been working together on this project, and we appreciate the opportunity to present it to you today. So we wanted to introduce Flywheel to you today. They're a boutique developer, commercial developer located in, based in Denver, Colorado, and active in multiple jurisdictions across the Front Range. And they have several philosophies, but two of them that I wanted to kind of talk to you about today are that they like to create relationships with their vendors and tenants and business partners, as well as the jurisdictions where they own and manage property. And so this is their first introduction to Longmont, so we want to introduce them to you. And then secondly, they engage in a lot of what we call value-add development, which is where you purchase an asset that is a little bit depressed and create improvements to increase the value of the property. And I'm going to talk about why that's important in a second. Hannah covered some of the logistics of this property acquisition, but essentially Flywheel purchased the property or acquired the property less than a year ago, and it was from a Japanese pharmaceutical company that also had a facility in Kansas. They relocated their operations to Kansas many years ago, and so they had many years of deferred maintenance that were never addressed at this building for the last several years. And so as a part of this acquisition, Flywheel is engaged in kind of bringing this building, which has great bones, kind of up to the standards of today's development. We already talked about the location of the project. In terms of the existing conditions, the building is, there are two buildings that are connected. One is an existing masonry office building that sits in front. It's 7,600 square feet. It sits in front of a 56,000 square foot metal warehouse. Fronting that building is a parking area, and then flanking it on the sides are they're basically weed lots right now with a little bit of kind of broken asphalt, and those are the areas that we would propose for the screened outdoor storage areas. So our conditional site plan incorporates modifications to landscaping, incorporation of landscape islands, the industrial outdoor storage yards that are screened, improvements to the flat work, as well as access for fire vehicles that we've talked with the jurisdiction about. So there were several review criteria statements that Longmont wished for us to address, and so I just copied them into this presentation so we could talk about them. So the first one is, the applicant is consistent with a comprehensive plan and the purpose of the code and zoning district, conforms to any previously approved concept plan, preliminary plat, or PUD overall development plan, and complies with the applicable statutes, codes, and ordinances and regulations. So firstly, as far as we know, there's no preliminary plat, or I'm sorry, there's no pre-existing PUD or pre-existing site plan. This would be the first site plan on the property. So we wanted to start to talk about how it's consistent with a comprehensive plan. We already talked about that it's in the mixed-use employment district. So we looked into Envision Longmont to see how we could incorporate a design that is complementary to your comprehensive plan. And there were several things that we felt really aligned with the owner. First is that from a commercial perspective, the owner is interested in the same interests as you, which are recruit, support, incentivize, and retain quality businesses to provide a comprehensive range of job opportunities and promote economic diversity, and promote and increase opportunities for collaboration, innovation, and entrepreneurism, and address building space, infrastructure needs, and other considerations of target industries and the workforce. And finally, Longmont is facilitating the development, rehabilitation, and/or adaptive reuse of existing property to meet the contemporary needs of emerging businesses while making a positive contribution to the appearance of the city. And this is the one that we felt really kind of aligns with Flywheel's value-add type of property development. So if we look a little bit more into the framework development plan, they've identified, or I guess you have identified the primary use that's encouraged in this district. And so this zone district primary use is a range of employment-oriented uses, including small-scale manufacturing, processing, wholesaling, indoor and screened outdoor storage, office, flex space, and commercial services. So we talked about this primary use of 1301 Iowa is medium industrial, which means development that involves the manufacturing, processing, fabrication, storage, transportation, distribution, or wholesaling of goods and services where no adverse environmental impact, including noise, smoke, odor, dust, or vibration, takes place beyond the boundaries of the lot on which the building is located. So we feel like the proposal that we're putting before you is in keeping with these things as it is already zoned. So let's look at review criteria statement 2. It says the application complies with applicable city standards, including for street, utility design and layout, and adequate utilities are available or will be provided for appropriate urban level services. This is our utility plan, and I'm going to talk a little bit about everything that's in it. So for fire access, the building already is equipped with a full sprinkler system, and we spoke with the fire marshal and negotiated with him that we would incorporate a fire loop around the perimeter of the building that would be designed to adequately support the weight of an 82,000, I think, pound of a fire truck. But it also serves us because we can get trucks around there and they can access the docks. So that's one of our upgrades. Another one is water. So currently the building is equipped with a 5/8 inch water service line, which isn't a very good water service for a commercial building of this size. So we're upgrading the water line to an 1.5 inch service line with a 1 inch meter, which has been approved by Hannah Chen, who's one of the engineers that's been working with us on the project with Public Works and Engineering. Our sanitary access is already appropriately sized for the facility. In terms of power, we're working with Longmont Power on replacing some of the existing equipment. There's an existing piece of equipment called a transclosure, which is not manufactured anymore and you can't get parts for. So we're working with them to replace that with a transformer, so more modern piece of equipment, and how that provides power to the building. And in terms of heating and cooling access, the gas is private, so I don't know if that applies here, but we are replacing some of the heating and cooling equipment in the tenant improvement project that we have going on in the office area, which is under a separate permit. I don't think it's part of this application. So if we move to review criteria statement 3, the application proposes development compatible with surrounding property in terms of land use, site, building layout, design, and access. So in terms of the building layout, it's not changing. We're not adding to or subtracting from the building layout, so that doesn't change. We've talked a little bit about the site, but we'll talk a little bit more about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about design and access in a minute, but we want to kind of focus right now on compatibility with surrounding properties in terms of the industrial outdoor storage. So if you look at this diagram, each of these properties that I show you, the purple color bar is our building, 1301 Iowa, and the yellow color bar is an adjacent property. So in this case, this one's 811 Sherman. It's catty-cornered from us on the intersecting street, and it has industrial outdoor storage. This one's 907 South Sherman. It's just across the street, across Sherman from us. This one is 805 South Lincoln. It's half a block to the north of us. It has industrial outdoor storage. And this one is 1100 South Sherman, and that is a City of Longmont property. And it shares our south and eastern borders, and really a large portion of it is industrial outdoor storage. So that's two of our property borders. Our north border is on Iowa Street. And then I want to talk a little bit about our east border. So you can see the purple diagram there. On the plan left side, there's a little building right beside us. It's an adjacent property. And we've been working with them on access. So if you look at the right-hand diagram, the right block is one of our, like half of the warehouse of our building. And then just to the left of that is, you can see part of the adjacent neighbor. Now, they have to enter our driveway to access their building from behind, and they have docks on the back side of their building. So we have worked with them to create an access easement that will allow them to access their back docks. Even though they're trespassing on our property, they'll have this shared access easement so they can continue to use their property in perpetuity as long as this access easement is in place. And so with that building, if you look at the left-hand diagram, we had a little bit of a Siamese twin situation where our gas line was coming in off of Sherman Street, connecting to our building, and then transitioning to connect to the adjacent building. Two separate property owners. So we had to consider whether or not we would replace those gas lines or provide an access easement. So we went ahead and worked with an adjacent property owner to provide access easement so that each property owner is protected in the case that anything happens to that gas meter or it needs to be serviced in some way. And then Hannah just showed you this rendering. It shows that we're going to be surrounding the industrial outdoor storage yard with 6-foot-high fencing that's going to be stained a medium gray tone that's in keeping with the fencing standards for the city. And we also wanted to tell you that there's an existing 6-foot-high hedge of Chinese junipers, full-size hedge. So when you're driving along that street, only at the very entrance where we have the parking can you really see into the property. It's mostly screened already. So behind that hedge, we'll have the screening wall that's required by the city. So I think it's going to be really well screened. So let's move to review criteria statement 4. The application will not adversely affect surrounding properties, the natural environment, existing or planned city transportation or utility services or facilities, or the adverse impacts of the use will be mitigated to the maximum extent feasible. So we already talked about the utility services and facilities. We're kind of upgrading a lot of them that need to be upgraded. I'm going to talk about city transportation in a second, and we'll talk about the natural environment in a second. But what we want to talk about here is adversely affecting surrounding properties. And so in my experience, when you improve a property, the surrounding properties' values tend to improve as well. And it kind of works in the opposite direction too. If you let a property go fallow, then some of the adjacent properties can as well. So we have already replaced the roof, added new exterior paint, and then we're in this whole process with the jurisdiction of refinishing the office area, replacing utilities, and upgrading the site amenities. So we're really in the process of trying to actively improve the property. And moving on to review criteria statement 5, the application where required complies with sustainability evaluation system requirements to mitigate impacts of development within the city's riparian areas as applicable to other projects as determined by separate agreement. So when we talk about the landscape plan, we have an existing alley of beautiful full-grown honey locust trees that adorn the perimeter of the site. And when Flywheel purchased the property, many of them were about to die because they hadn't been watered or they didn't have any water was the biggest problem. And so we engaged in an arborist to give us a strategy to bring those trees back to life. Now, one of the trees did die, and so it's going to be replaced with a Shade Master honey locust. So if you look at the bottom tree there, they're beautiful. They have this beautiful rich golden color in the fall. And then in the landscape islands that Hannah mentioned earlier, we're going to have Tartarian hot wings maples, which are a beautiful tree. So it's in the upper left corner. You see the bright red tree. That's what it looks like in the fall. And during the summer, it looks like the picture on the right. So it's a green tree, but it has bright red seed pods. So it's an amazingly gorgeous tree in all seasons. And we'll be placing them in landscape islands that don't have curbs so that the storm drainage can drain into the islands and be processed on site as well as provide some irrigation for the landscaping. So moving to review criteria statement 6, the application includes an appropriate transportation plan, including multimodal transportation access, and is integrated with connected where appropriate with adjacent development through street connections, sidewalks, trails, and similar features. And so we were really lucky to be right here in downtown Longmont because we are already adjacent to multiple existing and planned trails and bus stops and bike paths and vehicular access, including roads and highways, and municipal services all around. So I think that's just a function of being located in beautiful Longmont. And that concludes our presentation, so we're happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much. At this time, since this is a public hearing item, we'll go ahead and open this up for public invited to be heard. Jane is going to get the comments. Hold still. I'm sure there are going to be some questions coming to you in a minute, but first we're going to let the public, if there's anybody in the public. Sure.
As Jeremy pointed out, in general, the site has been administratively approved, so the item that we're focusing on here today is the use of the outdoor storage.
Sure.
So I just want to contain the comments and discussion to that use.
Yes. Nobody? Well, yeah, don't worry. Okay, nobody signed up, but we will go ahead and invite anybody in the public who would like to come forward and speak on this item. Please state your name and your address for the public record, and you will have 5 minutes.
Why, hello, and thank you for a very clear presentation. I'm Andy Bartlett, and I live at 4 South Bush Lane, which is about 1 block away. And maybe this should be directed to the Streets Department, but Iowa Avenue badly needs a sidewalk, and there is none presently. The traffic has increased greatly since people have been avoiding Ken Pratt Boulevard and using Iowa as a bypass road. And so the street is a good 65 feet across. There's plenty of room for a sidewalk. It doesn't need to interfere with any plans here. But if you could add into the street as part of the redevelopment, a good 4-foot sidewalk on the south side of Iowa, that would be greatly an improvement that would go along with this general approval. And so sidewalk, sidewalk, sidewalk. That was in the last section there. Okay. No sidewalk right now on neither the north or the south. Someone's going to get hurt. And it just needs to change. Ever since that development on west of Sherman, Walker, I think his name, that used to be the school district, that is now about 100 houses. So there's 2 residential neighborhoods, and this is in between those 2. So I think when Longmont was originally built, the thought was nobody's going to be walking here. Well, now there are a lot of people walking there, and there's nothing to protect us from the traffic. And so that was my one point.
Okay.
And maybe that could come out and tie into this as adjacent to the property and not on the property. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else in the public who would like to come forward? If not, we'll go ahead and we'll close out the public invited to be heard, and we'll now turn to the commission for questions, comments, and or motions. Do we have anybody who would like to step forward? Commissioner Flake.
Thank you. I don't know who I would direct this to exactly, but I wanted to verify the type of fence that will be used. So what is the material?
Yeah, it's going to be a 6-foot-tall, fully opaque wood fence with the finished side facing out. And it, like you said, it'll be stained like a natural gray color. And so that is in alignment with city standards for fencing.
And I imagine that you need the outdoor storage because these items can't be stored inside? And what would those items possibly be?
Do you want to address this one?
It would, we don't know yet because we don't have a tenant for the space, but we did have a tenant looking at the space that was a contractor, so they would have the items that they don't normally store inside, so maybe a stack of trusses or a stack of bricks or something, It would be very orderly, and we would have lanes going in the outdoor storage area to adequately designate and provide access, and there would be nothing stacked above the level of the fence. So as a pedestrian or as someone in a car, you wouldn't be able to see anything.
Tell me about the lighting for those two storage areas.
Yes, we have an electrical plan that we're incorporating pole-mounted lighting, so it will be adequately lit and safe, and that's a priority for the owner. So there are two large pole-mounted lights in each storage yard, and it's shielded so that the light trespass doesn't leave the site.
Also, I'll let you know that as part of the DRC review process, we reviewed the photometric plan for this, and the light temperature and all the other standards are in conformance with city code.
And the light bulbs themselves would not be viewable from any residential area?
Yeah.
Correct.
All lights are fully downlit and full cutoff, and there's no light trespass beyond the property line.
And the last question came to me because, as the gentleman talked about, I know this is a small area that you're changing on the site. Is there any possibility that our traffic department could have required sidewalks in addition to any improvements?
So as part of the DRC review process, we actually discussed adding sidewalks to this portion of that. As the gentleman from the public described, there's currently no sidewalks on either side of Iowa Avenue from South Sherman all the way to South Bowen. And we reviewed a proposal to add sidewalks adjacent to just the Iowa portion, sorry, not Iowa, just this applicant's portion of Iowa Avenue. But it was determined that without connectivity to either side, the sidewalk would not function as intended if it's just a single strip along the entire right-of-way. So it'd be a standalone sidewalk instead of providing connectivity. To my knowledge at this time, there's no capital improvement project for modifications to the right-of-way at this time.
I understand that part. And one has to start somewhere. So does Public Works, Traffic, Transportation have in place any kind of a way to collect funds towards the possibility at some point in time, enough could be collected and the city could match funds, I'm just thinking out of the air here, and create sidewalks, because as everything changes over to mixed use, we don't know what kind of uses that might be requiring people to walk.
Or if they want to walk to work.
There's that.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. Josh Sherman, Civil Engineer with Public Works on the Development Review Committee. Great question, and, you know, I think as Hannah tried to explain that was something that was considered during the review process. Just to elaborate on what she said a little bit, that in looking at, you know, where the property boundaries are, the property line in relation to the back of walk, or not the walk, but the back of a paved section, there would also be some additional dedication of right-of-way to be able to facilitate a sidewalk, which would also disturb a lot of that mature vegetation that was described previously on the frontage of this lot. So that was one consideration, and then I think you actually mentioned it before, something else that's also considered in situations like this is the scope and scale of the proposal that's being considered. So just the outdoor storage use piece related to the overall property, as if it were going to like fully redevelop, which in this case is not necessarily fully redeveloping, since the building's not changing and things like that, that's been described. To answer your question on the second part with regard to can we take in funds, there is the ability to, in other development applications, we do that. In fact, we do that through our public improvement agreement. If one of those are in place, in this case, there's not substantial or really any public improvements that were considered with this particular application, so that wasn't considered. It is something that is considered on other applications or could potentially be done here if directed.
Just for curiosity's sake, how wide is the existing right-of-way there?
I was looking at their Alta map, which I don't have in front of me right now, as well as measuring Google Earth while this conversation was going on in the background. It looked like it was about 44 feet flow line to flow line. So actually in this industrial area, what's happening is there's not even curb and gutter. there's just a small gutter pan along the edge of asphalt pavement. And then the right-of-way was immediately behind that, on the south side at least. And in looking at our minimum, street cross-section design standards, 44 feet in a, street like this is a typical cross-section flow line to flow line, which is why I mentioned before that if we wanted to start looking at sidewalks, it's gonna be one of two things, either narrowing up the drive, pavement section or acquiring additional right-of-way.
Since part of the uses here are industrial, probably the usual drive aisle, I'm forgetting, is it 10 or 12 feet, has to be wider to allow for trucks turning?
Off the top of my head, I believe it's 11 feet on
11 feet.
a street section like this for that type of use or for that type of street
So
cross-section.
that would give you, what, for
So-
even attached sidewalk, you'd get 6 feet on both sides?
I want to run and grab my computer that I've got the
Please.
standard detail pulled up on, but I'll be right back.
Thank you.
So I have in front of me our city standard details under section 200 for the street standards. And for a local street section, and forgive me, I'm gonna have to look and see, or maybe Hannah can help me if this is a local street designation, which I assume Iowa might be. It's actually 10-foot travel lanes and then 7-foot parking on both sides. So it's a relatively wide street cross-section there existing today versus what a local street parking on two sides would be 34 feet. If we were looking at a much larger street cross-section such as like an industrial collector, then we're talking about 12-foot drive lanes. I don't think this is a industrial collector street on Iowa at this
Okay.
location.
But it's sort of acting like one based on the traffic going through.
Well, that's based on volume, not necessarily the type of traffic.
Understood?
So I still think it's probably acting closer to a minor collector or a local street. But the width would be indicated because of that the industrial use down here.
Right. Okay.
Yep,
Thanks very much.
you're welcome.
I'm done. Thank
Done.
you.
Hey, Josh, can you come real quickly? Not necessarily for this, but for public who have any questions regarding sidewalks, should they, instead of waiting for something?
They can certainly reach out to me, or they can reach out to, my counterpart is Tom Street on the engineering administrator side for our streets and drainage on the capital program side.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next is Commissioner Height.
Thank you. I slaughter names. Kangella?
Yes.
Fantastic. The applicant indicated in materials that I read after I sent an email out to you earlier today, regarding whether or not this property ever been subject to any type of review or a site plan or conditional use plan or a preliminary plat, conditional use plan. And the indication was, as reported by Ms. Grant today too, that there's never been a site plan for this property. Is that correct?
Thank you for your question, Commissioner. The parcel was annexed in 1961 as part of the really large Southmore Park annexation. At the time of the annexation, no concept plan was created, so there's no way to amend a concept plan. In the same way, there's no preliminary plat that pertains to this parcel in the area. We reviewed all development applications for the whole annexation area.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then my next question for you is the 6-foot-high fence and then no storage, I guess is indicated in your recommended condition of approval, that there be no storage higher than 6 foot. Where's the 6 foot come from?
Longmont Municipal Code standards.
So all outside storage in this area or anywhere in the city is limited 6 foot
For
Behind-
non-residential zone districts, yeah.
behind screening?
Or just that the fence height is 6 feet.
And, okay, so the fence height is 6 foot, but is the screening then required to be below 6 foot? I'm just wondering why both are 6 foot.
So as part of the standards for outdoor storage, all items stored have to be fully screened from public rights of way. So that's the vegetation plus the fencing is to achieve that purpose.
then my last comment, to the applicant is I'm so happy that an MUE application is coming before us not to be a secondary use for residential. Thanks.
Commissioner Teta.
Well, I'm a little torn because I know we're just here to review the storage containers, and yet it really seems like it'd be a shame for us not to get them to put a sidewalk in on their piece of the frontage on Iowa, regardless of when the city might catch up with the rest of the connectivity in the area. So I'd be in favor of trying to condition that. Feels like they're willing to spend a lot of money on their property, on the parking lot, and maybe they could spend a little less on that and put a sidewalk in.
Do we have any other comments, input? Commissioner Popkin.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe just a couple quick clarifying questions. I respect my fellow commissioner's suggestion for a possible condition on the sidewalks. Is there precedent for that? And maybe you're a little bit newer, and so am I. So I'm asking out of ignorance here as well. In terms of properties that are kind of improved, looking at similar types of situations across Longmont, do we know if there's similar types of precedent for this kind of a request? I understand the spirit of it and don't fundamentally disagree with the spirit of it. Just want to know kind of how we handle that.
I might actually call up some extra firepower and institutional knowledge.
Please. I hear they're enhancing the firepower
If
access
Dawn would like to come
of
up,
the site
or
too.
Public Works. Thank you for your question.
Thanks, Hannah.
Chairman Poole and members of the commission, Don Burchett, could you repeat the question, Commissioner Popkin?
Of course. I just want to understand if there's, so my fellow commissioner had floated the idea of a possible condition for a sidewalk for a public-facing sidewalk for the portion of their property that's adjacent to their portion of the property. I'm just curious, like, how the city has handled that in the past for similar types of conditional site use upgrades, similar types of situations.
Sure. So, it really varies by, I would say, the location, the extent of the improvements that the applicant's going to be putting into the property, looking at trying some proportionality, and also looking at the existing conditions and the type of application that's in for review. So if we were looking at a larger project where we were doing building additions, we were maybe we didn't have existing landscaping in the location where this sidewalk would go. If we were doing a plat that was creating the lot where we could get the adjacent right-of-way added so that we could have that and have the applicant build that for us, then yes, we have done that. But on smaller projects or projects where the scope of the improvements are limited and the impact truly for what needs to be done and based on what the applicant is proposing, we've done where we've not made them put in all their improvements either. This isn't uncommon, and I would say that not only is it for public improvements, but it's also for other kinds of features that we do on sites, like landscaping as an example. We could try to apply, and the code says, is it commensurate with? And that statement, when you look at the improvements that projects are doing, oftentimes we've got to have a balance. If we're going to put in $300,000 worth of landscaping, but the project itself is only putting in $75,000 for the building improvements and changes maybe that they're making to the site, that's not really commensurate with what they're doing with the project. And so we did look at this with the DRC. We did take this into account at the beginning when we were looking at the pre-application meeting when they very first came in. It was a discussion amongst, the staff and the departments. The decision of the departments was that for this location at this time, this wasn't appropriate to ask the applicant to build it. And then when you look at its location with having gaps at both ends with other property owners, again, that would need to be something the city's going to have to pay for to connect in the future. Then we start looking at road projects. When we go in and we do redo that road for overlay, if we look at improving the drainage, if we put in curb gutter, then we do the sidewalk. That would be part of that capital project that we would do when we work in that neighborhood.
That's really helpful, Don. And if you were to do that capital improvement project type approach with the sewer, the gutters, potential landscaping, other design, I presume your goal the city's goal will be to make it contiguous and consistent.
Correct.
And having this kind of one patch of a sidewalk, however necessary it does sound like it will and how useful it will be, that would almost be a disruption and perhaps a construction impediment along the way.
It could be, because in order to tie that in to the full length, we would have to look at the full length of that road right-of-way from intersection to intersection. You bring up a great point there. A couple of things I do want to point out. One other thing that was talked about by Commissioner Flagg is, does the city have a funding mechanism? Well, I don't know that we have a funding mechanism, but we have a program for missing sidewalk sections in the city. And so, for example, on 17th Avenue this year, staff has been acquiring rights of way and is going to be putting in missing segments of sidewalks along that arterial street. A very busy street, a lot of activity, a lot of pedestrians. We want to make sure we fill in those missing areas. We also have looked at that south of 9th Avenue on Hofer Road on the west side, down by the Daniel West project. There's, again, gaps in our system. So there is a program for identifying where those are missing and then prioritizing those and working on getting those done. So it is a cost to the city, obviously. And so we try to prioritize those areas where we feel that there's high potential for danger and conflicts with our pedestrians and our vehicular traffic. And those are typically on our arterials right now. Those are the primary areas we're working on for that. So that kind of answers a little bit too to what Commissioner Flagg was talking about.
Great. And while I have you, I got two more questions.
Okay.
The first is, in your professional opinion, you kind of mentioned this kind of size of project matters.
Mm-hmm.
And in your professional experience and opinion, and Hannah, I welcome your take on this too, from small to large, does this generally sit more on the small type of upgrades?
Yes.
To a site versus large, just so we're thinking relative to other types of properties and all that?
Yeah, for the amount of while there are some landscaping improvements in the parking lot that are going to happen, irrigation improvements that are going to be put in, when you look at the actual area that they're asking for the conditional use on, it is the outdoor storage itself. So we're really looking at some kind of material in those areas that things can be stored on, and then fencing around it to screen it to make sure that it is screened from the rights of way and the other properties. So when I look at that in relation to, let's say, a building addition of 30,000 square feet, this is really minor.
Yeah. And Hannah, would you also agree with that? Just getting a second opinion from my dad.
For what it's worth. For reference, the original improvements to the site were being processed as a site plan waiver, as a change of use, which is one of our most minor application types. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful context. I also just want to note that I appreciate that the applicant clearly seems to be thoughtful with how they're approaching their conditional site upgrades. Could just pave over Paradise and put a parking lot here, and it sounds like you're actually giving some thought to the irrigation, the utility upgrades necessary, the fencing's required in terms of the city code, but the landscaping, the approach. So I appreciate that you're thinking about all of that. One more question for either Don or Hannah. Also a precedent question. So is it common that the city requires, as this draft condition suggests, that all items stored in an outdoor storage area shall not be stacked or stored higher than the screening fence? Is that a common condition that either the commission has applied in the past? Again, pardon my ignorance of being still midway through my first year, or that the city has generally applied for similar types of projects?
Commissioner Popkin, so what I would say is that there's a couple things going on, and I don't remember this section of the code the best, so I'm not going to say that it is a requirement, although it may be. But to be clear, we want it in the record as a condition that storage areas will be screening the outdoor storage. In order to make sure that happens, we want to make sure the applicant understands anything that's stored in those areas has to be below the screening so that it's not visible. The intent of the code is to make sure that we're mitigating that outdoor storage, the impact of seeing that from the adjacent properties. That's why we've put the condition.
I think we have Josh behind you ready to add to this.
All right, I'll let Josh take over.
I don't know if I want to add to to that particular response, but I want to add to the previous response. So mentioning the city's capital improvement program, and like Don mentioned, we have a missing sidewalks program, which actually may have come up in conversation in the last commission hearing a month ago. So I pulled that back up again here, and in the 2023, the 27 capital improvement program and in the approved budget, in fact, Iowa Avenue from Sherman Street to Bowen Street is included in the funded project for missing sidewalks. So that's the section along this frontage.
Just a second, let me get to you. I gotta.
I will yield to my fellow commissioner. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Josh, what year?
It looks like it's funded in 2023. I don't know where that is exactly in design and bidding and construction, but it is a funded capital project.
In 5 years somewhere.
Well, as you know, we do a 5-year capital program, but we only fund a budget for the following, for
Right,
a
right.
single year,
But
so
But it's on your radar.
it is absolutely on the radar.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Commissioner Goldberg.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner Popkin, were you done with your questions? Are you sure? Okay. First, I'm sorry. Is it Planner Cangilla or Cangilla? Cangilla, thank you. I know Commissioner Hyde already asked, but I had already forgotten. I just wanted to say welcome. Nice job on your first presentation.
Thank you.
And then I definitely caught Jennifer Grant. Jennifer Grant, I wish all applicants' presentations were like yours. That was an excellent, concise, thoughtful, clear presentation that makes our job easy, so thank you. A couple really quick questions because high level I'm favorable to this project and this application, and I don't see any reason to push back. Okay, so my first question was, when might these sidewalk improvements occur? Well, I think Mr. Sherman just clarified that there's funding for that in the near future. Commissioner Flagg, 1 year or 5 years, I don't care. It's funded, it's gonna happen, right? So that's cool. And then really, I did want to honor Commissioner Teda's concerns about the sidewalk. I too was, I thought it was thoughtful and certainly in line with how we generally look to make our projects more connected and kind of really inspire connectivity throughout our town. But it just doesn't sound like it was right in this scenario, and it sounds like there's a bigger project to kind of improve the whole area. So I think that's really wonderful. Jennifer, are you able to accommodate the height restriction? There's a condition being recommended to us by city that you limit your storage to the height of the screening. Is that something that you feel comfortable accommodating?
Yes, the development will put that in the leasing agreement with the tenant, that they can't stack anything above the requirement per the city.
Okay, well then, thank you. I thought you were going to say that. I don't have any more questions. I think as I just look to my peers, man, I don't see anything wrong with this project. What's that? One more? Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't see any problem with this application. I see a ton of improvements. I see an applicant who's really committed to improving their property. Let's see, I actually made a list of all the improvements they had, but you guys heard them. It was water, it was utilities, it was fire, it was just long-term benefit to this property that will hopefully inspire improvements in the neighborhood. So for all the reasons that that Hannah identified, as it met all of the criteria, and for all the improvements that the applicant is looking to do, and given the concern around the sidewalk being addressed, and the applicant's willingness to accommodate the condition that the city is recommending, I'll yield the mic, but I am supportive of this project.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Popkin.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner Goldberg, for perhaps holding your fire for one moment. I just had one follow-up question from before. Actually, it's not a follow-up, it's just a separate question, which is, I appreciated the thoughtfulness around the multimodal access and the transportation plan, and I know we've already addressed some of the pedestrian and sidewalk issues. I understand that in your plan, you currently stipulated you're going to add one bike rack out front. I just wanted to know how you're thinking about capacity for the bike rack versus capacity for the parking lot, given the regional connectivity and frankly, quite a bit of, pedestrian and bicycle access in the region.
Yeah, so in this project, there's no minimum, there's no, what is it, maximum or There's no. Sorry.
Bike parking is calculated commensurate with the amount of available vehicle parking spaces, so that is calculated by our transportation planners at the time of the DRC review. So it's a ratio of vehicle parking to bicycle parking.
Got it. And based on the expected tenant use, you think that the requirement of the city is sufficient for what you expect, or are you thinking there might be more? I'm curious as your thought process as
We're
developers in
providing
the region.
more than,
Yeah.
more than the requirement, which is 10%, I believe, and I think we have 44 parking spaces. I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but we're providing 6. We're providing a rack that has 6 spaces for 6 bikes, because it's a nice rack and we want the building to be nice. And yeah, so we aren't required to have 44 parking spaces. That's just what we could fit on the site after we incorporated the landscape islands. So there's no minimum, but there is a maximum on the site.
Great, I appreciate that. Like some of my fellow commissioners have said, I have no qualms with this project, and I think it sounds like a good neighbor upgrade. I yield.
Thank you, Commissioner Lukash.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to add my 2 cents here, and my opinion is in sync with all the other commissioners, or most of them, that this project brings a lot of value in the neighborhood with all the improvements that the applicant is promising to make. And I definitely appreciate the conversation around the sidewalk, and I'm glad to see that it's on the CIP schedule. So I think I'm happy with the project. So I will be in favor of this project.
Thank you. I'll go ahead. I'm going to put in my 2 cents. Once again, I appreciate the applicant's thorough presentation to us. They did a good job explaining how it meets Section 1502.055, Sections 1 through 6, and so for that, I will be in favor of this. And I guess I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve PZR 2023-8B with the one condition: all items stored in the outdoor storage area shall not be stacked or stored higher than the screening fence. Commissioner Height.
So, Ms. Cangella, I have to come back, Planner Cangella, am
No,
I?
we have a motion, so we have to,
Oh, yeah, I have more questions.
okay. Commissioner Goldberg.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Height.
Sorry. So, Planner Cangella, you identified for me, I believe, that the 6-foot-high fencing is a requirement of the city of Longmont, and that all outdoor storage can't be higher than the screening. So why would we need condition 1.51 in 8B?
Don Burchett was speaking about this, that the intent of the code is to ensure that no items being stored are visible. There is an example of a facility where they had a conditional use for outdoor storage, and the fencing was the 6-foot requirement, but somehow the way they've stacked their outdoor storage, it's still visible from the public right-of-way. So we're wanting to ensure that despite any considerations around the code or loopholes, that we have the precedent to go in and enforce the fact that nothing should be stored above this fence or visible from the public right-of-way.
So, there's a problem with the way the code's written such that we need to have this to ensure that we meet the intent of the code, which is now contradictory to what I understood to be the code.
Thank you for your question. In essence, we also want to make sure that the applicant here has a way to enforce with any tenants that they sign, that's a condition of signing a lease as well.
Don, thanks. What exactly is the code?
Chairman Poland, Commissioner Height. So, the thing that you guys, I think, hopefully understand is that we have property owners that when they tell us they're going to do something, they do it. We have codes that say you have to meet certain requirements. And then oftentimes we add conditions that are another way for us that if we have to get into the going through code enforcement and prosecuting them through court, we not only have a code section that talks about screening, but we also have a condition of approval of a project that said they agreed to do it. So, from my standpoint, we have an applicant who's willing to agree to a condition that helps us with any other future person who goes and stores stuff out there. From my personal opinion on this, I don't see this as a problem, but I don't know how we're going to address this for you.
I appreciate that, and I understand belts and suspenders. Now I'm gonna ask, Jeremy. If we add belts and suspenders, it suggests that the belt wasn't properly, fitted, meaning that the statute, is unclear. Do you want us to put suspenders around this belt that would allow then somebody else to say, well, the belt doesn't mean what the code, I'll stop with the metaphors, that the statute as drafted, apparently doesn't mean 6 foot high, and therefore we've had to adopt conditions, to supplement whatever is meant in that code. I think it's clear, I think the applicant's clear, they're gonna, cap their storage at 6 foot, but there seems to be a different problem that maybe we're making worse with this condition.
Thank you, Commissioner Height. I do believe the code adequately addresses the issue. I'm looking at 1505-130, which is under outdoor service, storage, equipment, loading, and display for development standards. And specifically subsection C, which says stored items shall not project above the fence or wall used to screen such materials. I think the code is sufficiently clear that we don't need the condition, but I recognize staff position that the condition is just an added level of insurance. I don't think adding it here is gonna impact us in the future, given that the code is clear that it says shall not project above the fence. So if the commission is so inclined to drop the condition, I think we're fine. If the commission's fine leaving it in as per staff recommendation, I'm not concerned for future enforcement of other properties.
Thank you. All. I'm done.
Any other comments? If not, Jane, I think we're ready for a vote.
Commissioner Height?
With reservations, aye.
Commissioner Teta?
Aye.
Commissioner Goldberg?
Yes.
Chair Poland?
Yes.
Commissioner Flake? Aye. Commissioner Lukacs? Aye. Commissioner Popkin? Chairman, that passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. This item now enters a 7-day appeal period. During this time, any aggrieved party may appeal the commission's decision by submitting a written appeal letter stating why the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision should be amended or reversed by City Council. All appeals must be in writing and must be received in the City Clerk's office and the Planning Office within the 7-day appeal period. The appeal period begins Thursday, September 21st at 8 a.m. and ends Wednesday, September 27th at 5 p.m.
Thank
We
you so
wa-
much.
Thank you. Do we want to take a 5-minute? Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back for the next item.
annexation for property at 11386 Rogers Road. In terms of location, the subject property is this particular one outlined in yellow. So it is basically north of the sugar factory area. It is just south of the intersection of 3rd and Lashley. So this particular site is roughly 9.25 acres. It has a comprehensive plan designation of mixed-use employment. And it is part of a larger county enclave in this particular area. So, City Council have referred this annexation for formal application at their October 25th, 2022 meeting. This particular request meets the contiguity requirements of Colorado Revised Statutes 3121-104A. As I mentioned, it is part of a larger county enclave. It is designated MUE. The applicant is seeking the MUE zoning, which is the appropriate zoning district for this particular Envision Longmont land use category. It is north and immediately adjacent to the sugar factory planning area, which was approved last night at City Council. So currently, this is unincorporated Boulder County. It's their general industrial zoning district, and it is being used for storage and auto wrecking type uses. So as I noted, this property is immediately north of the sugar factory sub-area planning area. So red star adjacent in reference to the steam and sugar factory sub-area plan. So this sub-area plan is focused on restoration and reuse of the historic sugar factory building and the surrounding areas with a mix of urban scale uses. Building a walkable community is a priority in this area, just to provide some context for this particular site. So the applicant in this case is proposing a multifamily development for this site, which is a secondary use in the mixed-use employment zone. It actually exceeds the minimum density of 18 units per acre. The current proposed, probably the maximum proposed 355 units of multifamily would have a density in excess of 35 acres, which is permissible within this zoning district. It does meet the review criteria for all application types and annexation, and it is consistent with Envision Longmont. So just as a side note as well, all required notices were mailed and posted for this project, and the required neighborhood meeting was held. No members of the public participated in the neighborhood meeting, nor did staff receive any written comments regarding this particular application. So I just want to discuss the concept plan briefly. At this point in the development review process, the concept plan does not contain a high level of detail, largely because there is only one use proposed, multifamily residential. All code requirements and development standards for this type of development will apply, and any deviations would require a concept plan amendment from the proposed development. So effectively, the full vicinity doesn't really show here, but we're still figuring out exactly where the exact access points, but there would be one at the northern end, one at the southern end, and probably a smaller one for accessing a leasing office. More likely than not, you would see some sort of connection up to Lashley Street at the north, most likely. So in terms of Envision Longmont consistency, the proposed annexation is consistent with the growth framework, the goals, and the policies of Envision Longmont. The mixed-use employment land use category allows for residential uses as a secondary use at minimum densities of 18 units per acre with no maximum. Primary uses include a range of employment uses, and secondary uses include supporting retail, hotel, cultural, high-density residential, and other civic-type uses. So in terms of specific policies and goals for consistency, Goal 1.1 does seek to embrace a compact and an efficient pattern of growth, while Policy 1B encourages infill and redevelopment, particularly higher density infill and redevelopment in centers, mixed-use corridors, and other accessible areas of change. This is This site is located within an area of change as designated within Envision Longmont. The surrounding area is largely, at least to the south, is underutilized industrial area that is, for the most part, unincorporated Boulder County. To the north, you have some of your industrial and flex space employment uses off of Weaver Park Road. So goal 1.2 promotes a sustainable mix of uses. Specifically, policy 2D under this goal seeks to plan for a combination of greenfield development, infill development, adaptive reuse, while policy 2E encourages a mix of housing types, and 2.4 does encourage higher density housing. So given that its location is immediately north of the sugar factory planning area, this particular planning area that it is adjacent to contains a number of sites that are targeted for infill and redevelopment. And this proposal would build the type of higher density housing encouraged by policy 1.2F that would be complementary to some of the larger planning activities that are going on in this area. As noted previously, this site is a designated area of change. Policy 1.4A encourages targeted and infill redevelopment on vacant lots or sites where existing structures and uses are no longer viable. 4B under this goal further promotes activity generating uses such as the multifamily development proposed for this property. As noted, the subject property includes currently a mix of both outside and inside storage with a large number of inoperable vehicles on site, which is really not the kind of use promoted by the policies related to goal 1.4. So I'd like to discuss briefly the annexation review criteria. So the proposed annexation does comply with the Municipal Annexation Act of 1965. The property boundaries are contiguous with the city of Longmont along at least 1/6 of the perimeter of the property. Approximately 45% of the property perimeter is adjacent to city of Longmont municipal boundaries. This property is located within the municipal service area as shown on the Envision Longmont Future Land Use and Transportation System map. In terms of the appropriate proposed zoning, the proposed MUE zoning district is the appropriate zoning district for the mixed-use employment comprehensive plan designation. As noted, the proposed multifamily development is permissible as a secondary use within this zoning district. This particular area of MUE zoning and land use has not yet approached the 50% maximum threshold for secondary uses, and I'll discuss that in more detail momentarily. In terms of criteria 4, the annexation of this property would not limit the ability of adjacent properties to integrate into the city or annex into the city. It would not create any additional enclaves. It is really a step in filling in a larger unincorporated county enclave adjacent to the city of Longmont. Additionally, the adjacent unincorporated areas are generally eligible for annexation into the city. So the annexation agreement with regard to criteria 5 will include conditions relating to continuance and termination of the existing uses on the property. In terms of the environmental requirements, I'll discuss this in more detail momentarily as well. The applicant has provided a completed Phase 1 environmental assessment as well as a limited Phase 2 assessment, and these assessments did not identify any recognized environmental conditions and did not recommend any additional assessment on the property. Again, there was some questions that I received earlier today, so I'm going to address some of these questions in a little bit more detail momentarily. So in terms of the criteria for all application types, we have found that this particular proposed annexation is consistent with all of these review criteria. It's Consistent with the existing MUE designation and Envision Longmont, as discussed previously, it's within the municipal service area, and it is eligible for annexation based on its contiguity and location within a county enclave. Additionally, it's accessible to planned or existing utility and transportation infrastructure, and it's within an identified area of change that is appropriate for the type of infill and redevelopment that's being proposed. Compliance with the applicable city standards for utility and transportation improvements will be addressed as this project moves through the development review process. At this point, adequate utilities have been identified as existing to serve the proposed development of this property. In terms of compatibility, this property is, as I noted, located within a county enclave that does include a number of vacant and underutilized parcels. Uses within the city of Longmont to the north include a number of commercial and enclosed small-scale industrial employment type uses. To the west are an area known that are zone mixed-use corridor. There is currently a proposal for redevelopment for a multifamily development within this area that is under review. And again, the adjacent sugar factory planning area is targeted and proposed for a mix of urban scale uses. So staff feels that this is a compatible proposal for development in this area. In terms of mitigation of impacts, annexation of this property would not adversely affect surrounding properties, the natural environment, or any existing or planned city facilities. I did note that utility providers have adequate capacity to serve the proposed development. There have been environmental site assessments completed for this property. There have been initial drainage studies as well as initial raptor nesting surveys. As this project moves through the process, there would need to be updates to the drainage surveys or studies, to the raptor and habitat surveys, as well as detailed tree surveys and tree mitigation studies, et cetera. Let's see. So additionally regarding the road network, a traffic study was submitted and accepted as part of this process. And it did find that the proposed development would be successfully incorporated into the existing and future roadway network in Longmont. These studies are included with your packet. And as noted, because this is the really initial stage of the development review process and planning for this property, any future development review processes, so platting, site plan, et cetera, will incorporate updates to these studies and design of any improvements that are needed. So in terms of the sustainability evaluation system, staff did identify potential wetlands south of this property through the review process, and the applicant has submitted a memorandum of understanding that a full assessment of any wetlands on or near the site and findings from this assessment would be included and reviewed as part of the site planning process. Required buffers would mitigate any potential impacts, though at this time, the southern portion of the property is proposed really for on-site detention with no drive lanes or any sort of hardscape development beyond drainage features. So should any wetlands be identified, then the applicant would be held to those required setbacks requirements for wetlands. So, and as noted again, a traffic study has been submitted for this application. It was found sufficient. Future applications will require a multimodal plan as well as appropriate improvements and connections to be incorporated into the planning process. With regard to the multimodal plan, I will go ahead and note, as noted in the traffic study, that there are RTD stops at Third and Lashley, which is about a block north of this property, and Third and Alpine, which is about 2 blocks northeast of the property. And on the north side of Rogers Road, as well as the north-south streets, there are sidewalks on those properties as well. So any future development of this particular property would require improvements to Rogers Road on the frontage of Rogers Road, adjacent to this property to city standards. So in terms of secondary use criteria, the proposed development or the proposed residential does have good access to the road network. It would be compatible with the surrounding uses. As I noted, there are residential uses under review for an adjacent property, which is located in a different zoning district. And then the adjacent sugar factories planning area is targeted for a mix of uses that would presumably include some multifamily residential. There are some, that particular planning area, they've had the sub-area plan completed and approved, which really sets a framework for future development in that particular area. So so the proposed residential use is in close proximity to employment uses and could provide a viable alternative to driving for employees who happen to work in this area as well. So it really does meet that compact, efficient development target that we talk so much about. So in terms of whether the secondary use is consistent with the comp plan, it is a permitted secondary use under the MUE comprehensive plan category, and the intent of the underlying zoning district as far as having that complementary mix of uses. It is, high-density residential is considered a supporting land use for higher-density commercial and employment uses within the MUE categories. So the map on the following slide will further illustrate the compatibility with this criterion in terms of substantially whether or not it would substantially diminish the availability of land available for primary uses. So we had our GIS specialists perform an analysis of secondary uses within this larger mixed-use employment area. One thing to note is this analysis was done based on the mixed-use employment Envision Longmont category, simply because there are some significant unincorporated county enclaves in this area, so it made a little bit more sense to do it on that broader scale. So as a rule, total area of secondary uses in a given contiguous area of zoning shall not exceed 50% of the total area. The subject property represents 2.5% of the subject area, and all other secondary uses comprise about 15.5% of the area for a total of about 18% of this larger MUE area. This is well below the threshold of 50%. The other secondary uses include 2 car dealerships on 3rd Avenue, 2 self-storage facilities, an existing multifamily development on the south side of Ken Pratt Boulevard, that would be the farmhouse apartments down here on the southern end, as well as the proposed Sugar Mill Station multifamily development in this particular area. So since this packet was posted, questions have been raised about environmental conditions on the site. A Phase 1 environmental site assessment was submitted with the application for annexation that recommended no further assessment at this time. This ESA, I'm going to be referring to them as ESAs now because I don't want to say environmental site assessment over and over. So this ESA referenced a 2021 Phase 1 and limited Phase 2 ESA that had identified recognized environmental conditions, particularly groundwater levels of arsenic, cadmium, selenium in excess of state standards. The 21 ESA is included as an appendix to the 2022 Phase 1 ESA. It's important to note, these ESAs are marked as draft because they typically are not considered final until the property closes, as well as they have a limited period of validity. So a follow-up limited Phase 2 ESA was conducted last year that is referenced in the most recent Phase 1 ESA to confirm the previous findings. This ESA, as well as a summary memo, have been provided in hard copy to the commission, since it does appear they were inadvertently omitted from that 2022 Phase 1 ESA report. So the 2022 ESAs identified errors in the professional approach and methodology in the 2021 ESA and testing completed as part of the study. They did follow-up testing and in the same vicinity where the contaminants had been found and as part of this the follow-up Phase 2. And they found that these areas did not actually have levels of contaminants exceeding state standards, and they were more in line with the background levels of these types of contaminants you would see in the soils in this particular area. So I'll also note to you that Section 15.02 140C does address environmental ESAs of land to be annexed. Subsection 1B states that the city may require remediation by the owner of any environmentally contaminated property within the annexation as a condition of approval. And subsection 1C does not prohibit annexation of land with known environmental contamination, but it also notes that annexation does not act as a waiver of any remediation requirements. So with that, staff does recommend approval of this project, finding that it does meet the review criteria for annexations, for secondary uses, and for the general review criteria. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan McBreen, who is the applicant, and will discuss their project.
Always have to adjust these. Good evening, Ryan McBreen, Norris Design, 244 North College Avenue, Fort Collins, Colorado. Excited to be here tonight, so thank you for your time this evening. And first and foremost, I want to thank Jennifer and the rest of the staff. Thanks for a thorough presentation and actually getting to this point. As she mentioned, we started back October was when we were at City Council. So, and we understand we're very early in the process. We have a ways to go, but this is the process, so we're going to go through it, and we're excited to be here tonight. Jennifer did a really great job of being thorough with her presentation, especially hitting the review criteria. So we're going to try not to belabor the point this evening, but we're excited, and we want to hit on a few highlights and points and add some color, and just talk a little bit more about this project because we're excited to move it forward. All right, just a little bit about Kairos Residential. They're the applicant. They're known as a thoughtful and high-quality residential developer throughout the Colorado Front Range with a lot of experience, and they're very excited to be here in Longmont and bring their product here. In fact, Tyler Sibley's here tonight, and he can answer any and all questions you might have about them and what their vision is for this project and this property as well. I think we've identified where it is. It's a great location, a lot of momentum building in the area with the sugar mill and the steam plant, and just its proximity to downtown Longmont. A little further added color, obviously we're asking for annexation. As enumerated through Jennifer's presentation tonight, she talked about how we do meet the qualifications and requirements to qualify for annexation. As you can see here, our property highlighted along with a few others around it. We're kind of the hole in the donut in this part of the city, so it makes natural sense to be annexed into the city of Longmont. A little more color, obviously it's in Boulder County unincorporated right now. Here is kind of what the property looks like, right? As a city planner, we understand there's always parts of the city that you do have to have storage and junkyards and stuff like that, but we believe the time has come for this area to redevelop. So right now it's kind of a blighted area, if you will, and it's kind of ready for a fresh new look. A few other views and pictures of what's going on out there right now. As noted, Envision Longmont wants to call it mixed-use employment, and we want to comply with that. We agree with this assessment, and the full intent is for us to develop the property in line with the mixed-use employment zoning designation and all the trappings that come along with following the City of Longmont's land use code for this property. I've already been through the concept plan, but our intent is to follow through on this. This gives a high-level view of our access where detention will be highly amenitized project to have different amenity pockets. So the plan is to move forward, assuming we have recommendation for approval, to move forward with the site plan and kind of fully develop that, which is the exciting and fun part, and we're excited to get to that point. You know, there's benefits to this project. You know, this is further building on to all the momentum, as we mentioned tonight, going on in the sugar mill area as well as the steam plant. This is just going to further build upon what's going on there. A lot of exciting, cool stuff. I know there was an article earlier in the week about what's going on over the sugar mill. That's very cool stuff. So this is just going to bring more people and more mass to that area just to help keep this going. Obviously, as we know, there's kind of the housing issue along the Colorado Front Range. This is just going to further help alleviate that. And let's be honest, being in the city, it will provide increased revenue for the city, being that it's not unincorporated any further. And as mentioned before, high quality development, which is what Cairo is all about. They want to bring a great residential community to Longmont, and it's very important to them that they do that. As mentioned, we don't have the design done for this project yet. That's the next step. Don't want to put the cart before the horse, but we have an idea. And we just want to show some representative architecture and kind of layouts and what Cairo has done in other parts and other communities. As you can see, great architecture, great spaces people want to be in, people want to use, places people want to live, indoors and outdoors, as well as resort-style amenities that's what the residents, that's what people looking for housing are looking for, and we want to provide that in these communities. So Jennifer did a great job going through all the review criteria, so we're not going to do that. That's in your staff report. She went through it tonight. We believe we meet all the criteria to be approved for annexation. So we ask for your support this evening, tonight, to push us through to the next stage. Now, I will be here, as well as Tyler, and we're happy to answer any and all questions you have about the project, including if there's any further clarifications needed for the environmental reports as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Since this is a public hearing item, we will go ahead and open this up for public invited to be heard for comments on this. We have nobody who has signed up. If anybody in the public who is in the audience would like to come forward, you get 5 minutes to speak. Seeing nobody come up, I will go ahead and close out the public invited to be heard and open it up to the commission for questions and comments. Okay, Commissioner Flagg.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know with whom I need to talk about the environmental situation on site presently.
Tyler Sibley with Cairo Residential.
Thank you, Tyler.
Yes.
I noticed that the site doesn't seem to be paved. Looks like it's dirt. And so, in spite of any environmental assessment, yes or no on it, what is it going to take to clean that site up in order for residential development to be permitted on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our agreement with the current property owner calls for them to completely remove all the current occupants' materials. There's about 500 or so leases on the property today that just are governed by month-to-month, primarily month-to-month leases that have, you know, everything from RVs to boats to buses to inoperable cars. And so by the time that we purchase the property, what the current owner owes us is a completely vacant site. Like you mentioned, it's all, call it compacted dirt today, primarily, that, you know, effectively operates as an asphalt surface just from a impervious cover perspective. But ultimately, they owe us the site in a clean condition, vacant of all current occupants and materials.
To what depth will the soil need to be removed?
Yeah, we don't believe, based on the reports that we've performed to date, we don't believe that there's any extraordinary environmental soil remediation or contamination that needs to be, mitigated or removed or hauled off site. I know that there's been a couple reports that have been thrown around. I think it's important to talk about our process on the environmental front, just relative to our due diligence. The report references an April of 2021 environmental report from an RSB engineers. That's not our engineering group. That was an engineering group engaged by the current owner as part of their due diligence process when they purchased the property from the former owner. Our process for this property, along with any other property that we pursue across the country, really involves a two-man team of professionals, an environmental consultant group that does all the physical on-site testing, and also an environmental attorney that handles, call it state and local matters that come up and arise with these environmental conditions. And so, as noted in the Phase 1 report, part of our due diligence is we make sure that our consultant team is provided with those historical reports that are provided to us as part of due diligence. So naturally, we noticed that there was some potential recognized environmental conditions associated with that April 2021 report that the current owner performed. And so as we really analyzed those reports, as we did our own due diligence, as we did our own testing, as Jennifer mentioned, we did 6 groundwater boring samples right in line with where their test results were. And all those test results that we performed were different readings than they provided via their consultant. And so we did a Phase 2 report, not necessarily because we had to, just out of the abundance of caution, belt and suspenders, if you will, to ultimately just confirm that we didn't have to go do anything else above and beyond, just the traditional on-site construction activities. Just big picture, I mean, we attack environmental issues head-on, very aggressively, very stringently, because, we ultimately don't want to be liable. We've gone through the Brownfields program here in Colorado with CDPHE. I mean, we're very familiar with it. We're very quick to go down that path. And if there was any environmental conditions on site that existed today, we would be sure to go, mitigate those to the extent necessary. But we spent lots of time, lots of money, both with our environmental consultant and our environmental attorney, to make certain that, we're completely comfortable, they're completely comfortable with the overarching environmental condition of the property. So in terms of just answering your question very simply, we don't think there's any extraordinary, over excavation, if you will. It'll just be, pursuant to the geotechnical standards that do require some over excavation, moisture conditioning, lime stabilization, so forth, to stabilize the foundations and the structures.
Thank you.
Commissioner Popkin.
Thank you. I'll just follow up on that same line of questioning since we're on the topic. It's Tyler, right? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. First of all, Jennifer, thank you so much for, I know I sent you on a little bit of an errand this morning, and appreciate the extra documentation here. This is really helpful and hopefully extremely clarifying today. So that's where I'm hoping to get to. I want to follow up on Commissioner Flagg's line of questioning as well on the ESAs. And so just so that everyone, including the public who's watching, if they're really enthralled by this, is on the same page. A Phase 1 environmental site assessment, or ESA, is really focused on that kind of desktop, kind of surface level review, right? That's what a Phase 1 looks at. And then a Phase 2 is more of it includes soil or water samples, and water samples looks at the same things that the Phase 1 looked at, but in more detail, and it involves kind of that on-site extraction and then laboratory testing. Is that basically the distinction between a Phase 1 and Phase 2? Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, yes and no. I think a Phase 1 is definitely more than just a cursory desktop review. As you mentioned, I'd call a Phase 1 a comprehensive historical use of the subject property and the adjacent properties. I think the key distinction, to your point, between a Phase 1 and Phase 2 is the actual physical work and testing that happens on site. So Phase 1 really generally typically stops with just physical site inspection, looking around, interviewing historical property owners, interviewing any occupants on site in terms of things that they've seen either presently or historically on site, either on this subject property or with neighboring adjacent properties that could suggest, environmental, risks, if you will. And so just the aggregation of that historical data really, either says, hey, you need to go do more additional studies to go confirm that you either do or don't have issues that you need to rectify, or just simply, clarifies that, hey, there's no reason that this property should have any environmental conditions that are extraordinary compared to a property that's been prairie land for its entire existence. And so the key distinction is just the physical work and the testing that you do between phase 1 and phase 2. Like I mentioned, we went ahead and performed the phase 2 because, again, environmental recs are a 4-letter word for us. And so ultimately, making sure that there's no environmental situations or issues or cost drivers for us is a huge part of our, due diligence process. And so hopefully that answers your question, but that's how I'd kind of distinguish between a phase 1 and phase 2, both of which we did.
Yeah, that's great and very much aligns with my understanding, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. So just so I understand the timeline here, there have been 4 ESAs conducted on this site. At least in recent memory since 2021. There was a phase 1 ESA conducted by the seller, a limited phase 2 ESA conducted by the seller, and then you all did a phase 1, and then you also did a limited ESA phase 2, correct?
Yeah, I don't know the extents of all the sellers' due diligence work just off the top of my head. I don't remember if the April 21 report was a phase 1 or a phase 2, so it was both. I know that we did a phase 1 and a phase 2. So, yes, 3, at minimum 3, perhaps 4 total tests in the last, call it 3 years.
Great, thanks. And it seems like, at least from the communication here, that you thought it was optional from your professional opinion, to do a phase 2, but you went ahead and did that anyway, probably for some good due diligence, especially in the state of Colorado and given the surrounding area. And I just want to note for the record, that's not pocket change. That's that's a few $1,000s, if not tens.
Yeah, there's tens of thousands.
Yeah, tens of thousands of dollars. So I appreciate that you guys are thinking about that, and clearly you have, significant knowledge navigating some of these topics, which not every developer has. So I appreciate that. In the phase 2, in the limited phase 2 ESA conducted by RSB, which I understand is not your consultant team, laboratory results aside, because I know that there were some issues that I want to understand that in a moment. But there were 2 recognized environmental conditions identified in that. And you may take issue with the approach and methodology, but I just want to kind of acknowledge these for the record so we hopefully can just clear the air and perhaps clear the soil along the way.
Sure.
So that you don't have other 4-letter words to bring to our attention. There were 2. The second one talked about the nature of staining from kind of the material stored on the property. It talked about the mismanagement of the material stored on site. Again, not from you guys, from prior use of the site. Talked about the possibility exists, and I'm reading here, that over the duration of the operation, potential release of hydraulic fluid and petroleum products might have impacted the subsurface conditions of the subject property. So they flagged that as a recognized environmental condition. But that seems to be disputed by your ESA phase 2 or limited phase 2, given the laboratory results and testing that you all did. Am I correctly understanding kind of this back and forth here?
Look, I can't represent or, warrant what, another owner's environmental consultant says on the property or not. What I can stand behind is, our team and the depth of their experience and dozens of projects that we've done with them, and dozens of projects, hundreds of projects probably that they've done here in the Front Range metro area. So all that said, obviously the reports do say different things. We have worked with our team on many, many projects, and ultimately are very quick to go into, these brownfields or VCP or whatever program is applicable for these types of conditions. But ultimately, again, we certainly stand by the reports that our consultant team has put together. Can't, necessarily speak to, reports that other folks have put together.
Sure. Understand that. And for the record, VCP is Voluntary Cleanup Program, just for folks to understand the acronym there. The first recognized environmental condition or REC that is flagged in the RSB, so not yours, but the RSB phase 2, was the historical usage of the subject property. And I'm curious if, because I didn't see any mention of the historic usage discussed, at least in, granted, I received only yours about 2 hours ago. So in the executive summary that I looked through in the introduction, I didn't see any mention of the historic usage in that. And I don't recall seeing that in your phase one when I was reading that earlier. But if that is in there, I mostly just want to know, like, the historic usage of the property is kind of, you know, water under the bridge at this point. But in terms of how you're approaching this going forward, when you look towards development of the site in the future, how does your team generally handle kind of more historically complicated projects where development might be potentially complicated by the potential presence of, you know, fluids or other substances?
Yeah, I don't remember if the RSB report talked about historical uses or just the on-site current occupants and you know, elements that were, you know, occupying the site, that they had staining of, you know, there was some gasoline on the property that was just visually observed. Yeah, it was a mix of both. So ultimately, I mean, the way that we handle, you know, all projects that we do, whether they're, you know, going through the VCP or Brownfields program, or it's prairie land development, if you will, right, is we have a soil management plan that we put in place with our contractor that deals with some of the unknowns, because, you know, while a phase one or even a phase two, and, you know, all the geotechnical borings that you might be able to do just during your due diligence phase, the reality is, you know, you don't know what you don't know until you really start getting out there and excavating the soils and seeing what lies beneath, if you will. And so how we govern that with our contractor is a soil management plan that ultimately talks about, hey, if you encounter, you know, underground storage tanks, you know, do this. If you encounter, you know, hazard materials, call that number. You know, so it really addresses just the potential scenarios of just all those, you know, multitude of different environmental conditions or unforeseen circumstances that you could encounter during the construction activities. And so that's how we generally govern that, knowing that, again, it's impossible to know what you don't know until you really start doing it on site.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. And, you know, just for anyone who's watching or for other commissioners and folks here, like, these kinds of redevelopment happen across the country. Like, there are hundreds of thousands of examples of this, and that's great. And it just requires additional due diligence, requires thoughtfulness that it seems like your team is bringing to the table here.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I mean, I always ask a simple question to our two-man team of, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, how severe do you think this property is just from an environmental contamination and risk perspective? You know, 1 being, you know, it's prairie land development, has no issues whatsoever. 10 being, you know, there's no way in the world, you know, you're going to be able to develop residential uses on the site, which we've certainly encountered some of those properties across the country. Their answer was a 1.5. So just for context purposes, and it's very low in terms of their, you know, call it professional ranking, if you will. Of just how to evaluate what the risk spectrum is for environmental concerns for just everything that you can encounter in this type of arena.
Right, and that's really helpful. And so then the mitigation, the management approaches that you guys would take, your team is comfortable with that, you have experience doing that, not too concerned, but there's some additional thought that needs to go into as you continue to move forward.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Good. What I don't always see when I'm looking at environmental site assessments is a little bit of this discrepancy. And so I just wanted to kind of clear the air here. In your email that we're seeing today, and I guess was sent today, I think it was yours, yes, Tyler. There was a reference to professional errors in approach and methodology. I just want to understand what that's referring to, just so we can have a deeper understanding of that. And again, sorry, we're just getting this.
Yeah, understand. And this, you know, came across my desk this morning at, I think, 11 a.m. too. So appreciate our team and Jennifer for jumping on this quickly. So full caveat, I'm not an environmental engineer, I'm an accountant. So just with that disclosure, and without trying to disparage RSB and their, you know, company, means and methods, I don't know them. We've never worked with them, never talked with them. You know, my understanding is that the approach of how they ultimately tested the groundwater, how they filtered the groundwater pursuant to CDPHE and state standards, you know, was not fully followed. And so I don't know, you know, what impacts that had on the nature and the character of the results, but do know that that was the feedback from our team. And so just as we kind of got educated of kind of this potential risk factor, because as we get the due diligence report, we don't have the benefit of our own phase 1 or phase 2. So we just get these reports and we see, oh my gosh, there's groundwater contamination. We're going to have to, install temporary or permanent monitoring wells. We might have to have, dewatering during construction, all the different things that could go into, proper execution of handling those potentially contaminated groundwater conditions. That's my understanding in terms of just how that those groundwater samples were treated and filtered and ultimately, handled with the laboratories.
Great. So just to kind of recap this whole journey here that we just went on, it sounds like there was a phase 1 and phase 2 conducted by the seller. That raised some potential flags. Obviously, your team took interest in that and wanted to dig into that more.
Yeah.
So your team then conducted a phase 1 and phase 2 as well to, let's say, trust and verify, or in this case, contradict and verify.
Don't trust but verify. Yes.
Sure. So after those 4 reports, your environmental consultant team not only said, hey, this is kind of the very low end of the concern spectrum that you have from your professional experience, and then also said, and I presume it's the environmental team that you had here, said, and we identified some potential errors in approach and methodology in that first one, and we've done the subsurface testing and groundwater testing to basically back that up. Is that?
That's fair.
Fair? Great. Thank you for all of those clarifications. I think I will yield. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments, questions? I have a question for Jennifer. Has there been steps taken to create a synergy between this and the sugar factory area? Has that been taken into consideration? Has there been any kind of back and forth talking about we're planning on doing this, we're planning on doing that? Is there any of that going on in the background?
So my understanding, and Glenn, you can pipe in on this as well, Tony Chacon is the project manager for the Sugar Factory Steam Sub-Area Plan. He is also our redevelopment coordinator, and I know he has had discussions even before this project came through the application door with the applicant team regarding this. So there's definitely some
talk.
There's some coordination.
Yeah, and I'm happy to jump in there too. So I've probably personally been involved in probably at least 5 different discussions with the various stakeholders associated with the sugar mill project. That includes, the team that's working on the sugar mill itself, along with the folks that are developing the community to the west of us, and the Fairfield folks that are developing in closer proximity to the sugar mill proper. And so lots of different factors, as you all well know, in terms of how that sugar mill property gets, goes through their own environmental and, asbestos cleanup, situations, and ultimately finds a way to, bring that property back to life. And so we continue to stay engaged in those discussions with those various stakeholders, knowing that, their process, as, our process, and each of the different stakeholders' processes are all, on different timelines and have different pinch points and considerations that are involved to, get each project to their respective finish lines.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up, Jennifer, will this have any impact? I mean, is the sugar mill area kind of already planned out as far as the percent of residential versus, or I should say the percent of secondary uses versus primary? Is this going to affect that at all? They're kind of getting the first dip at it, so.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we don't have a lot of detail yet as far as the land uses for the sugar factory. I mean, we know some raw numbers. They're looking at potentially on the roughly 258 acres, maybe 2,000 units, 250,000 square feet of retail and other non-residential uses that would fit. Just a rough calculation, I was pretty close to what our GIS folks put as far as percentage of secondary uses, being well below, what we've kind of just said as a staff and a planning commission policy as less than half.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldberg.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Thanks to the applicant. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I don't have any issues with this project. I'm really favorable to this. I think there's a lot of strengths to what the applicant is proposing. Jennifer did an excellent job highlighting most of those. You know, its compatibility with Envision Longmont, consistent with mixed use, infill in a fairly blighted area. You know, general improvement to what's happening there. It meets the review criteria for annexation, our general review criteria, our secondary use criteria. It's close to public transportation opportunities. So I don't have any issues with this project. I think this is really a wonderful opportunity to improve an ugly part of our town. And I think when you're talking about revitalizing the Rogers Corridor or revitalizing this part of town, I'm generally favorable. When you're talking about annexing in land into Longmont that's within our borders, I'm almost always favorable to that. And when it serves our massive housing gap that we can't, that we're struggling to build our way out of, I'm going to be favorable to that. So barring any concerns from the rest of the commission, I'm likely to be supportive of this.
Thank you, Commissioner Height.
Thank you. I'm going to keep beating the horse. MUE is supposed to be primarily employment-based land use with secondary uses for residential activities. The interpretation that we're going to look at secondary uses on a zone-wide basis, I don't find to be a rational basis of interpretation of that code provision, and so I will continue to not support plans that are not at least on-site less than 50% residential. That's my interpretation. That's the problem I'm going to have with all MU projects that contain residential that's greater than 50%. More significantly, however, or maybe not more significantly, but significantly nonetheless, I too had environmental questions that I posed to Ms. Hewitt-Apperson this morning regarding the Phase 1, Phase 2 assessments. There was a May 21 assessment and April and/or June 22 assessment. The earlier assessment, I don't know who it was performed for, but it documented with photographic evidence of environmental concerns. There was staining of soil, there was mismanagement of drums, don't know what was in those drums. There was a Phase 2 done. There was arsenic, which is kind of a nasty thing, found in groundwater, found in soil. Mr. Sibley's response, sitting on our dais this evening, I guess in response to questions that possibly more than one commissioner posed to staff, indicates that, well, yeah, we looked at that. Their Phase 1, the June 22 assessment, doesn't have photographic evidence of these problems that were found a year before. I don't know why that would have happened. I don't know why the earlier report was appended to the later report, why the earlier report doesn't even reference the environmental concerns identified in the earlier report is somewhat concerning. But to now describe that the sampling done in 21 was remiss because there were not proper filtering of materials seems stretched to me. Arsenic, to my understanding, is not used as a buffering agent, is not used as a preservative in environmental sampling. So the presence of arsenic, because it wasn't, the sample wasn't properly filtered, doesn't add up to me. So I don't have the answer to that. My question is, does the city have someone who's looked at these two reports? And does the city have some type of professional review that they can share with me to get me comfortable with these two disparate conclusions?
Sure. So our public safety group does have a staff member who does these reviews. Unfortunately, she is unavailable to folks that would have the knowledge of this particular item. They are out of town this week. As part of the DRC review, they would have been had this document referred to them for review, and we did not have any comments or concerns expressed by them.
Respectfully, she wouldn't have seen the material on the dais this evening, correct?
That
Because
is,
it wasn't included in the applicant's materials?
that is correct. It was referenced in the applicant's materials.
There was no reference to a Phase 2 assessment.
There was a reference to a Phase 2, not to split hairs, but there was a reference within, that there had been a Phase 2 done in June. It just, for some reason, did not get included. I'm not really sure why.
I might have to retract that, I apologize. Was there, yeah, RSB did, yeah. It was referenced, but it wasn't included in the materials that the city's staff would have reviewed.
That is correct.
Okay. So yeah, I find that there's a big open-ended issue with respect to the environmental conditions of this property. That, again, not a criterion for annexation, to thumb up or thumb down, but a matter of concern nonetheless that gives me pause. Thanks.
Jennifer, as a follow-up to that, are there any other planned future ESAs? So when they go to the next phase, if this does get approved, will there have to be any other ESAs done to go past the next step?
So typically ESAs are required for annexation. We can always request them as part of an additional development review process if we find that there's sufficient reason to want follow-up work done.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Popkin.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate my fellow Commissioner Height over there continuing to share his thoughts and some of his concerns regarding the ESAs. I shared many of them myself, mostly until the conversation we had, though I still wanted to discuss that a little bit further. Maybe a way that you can help give us some confidence here and just kind of how your company approaches this and how you're thinking about the property is, conditions aside, I mean, you know what you're taking over. You know the kind of site you have. Like, it's not hidden from public view. Like, it's pretty obvious if you walk by, if you bike by, if you just walk the site. It's probably you have for acquiring it. So, there's been there've been 2 Phase 1s and 2 Phase 2s, and irrespective of what your Phase 2 said at this point, the current seller is going to be removing a bunch of oil drums and a bunch of other fluids and chemicals from on site. So walk us through kind of your process. I know you'd mentioned before the soil management plan and maybe some other strategies. Can you just kind of clarify on the record here for us, like, how do you guys handle these types of properties, even if they're at a 1.5 out of 10, just to make sure that you're all above board and that people who are future tenants who are moving in have a safe place to live going forward? Just walk us through your process, because maybe that can help speak to, give some more confidence to my fellow commissioners here as well.
Sure. Would you mind just expanding on the question a little bit more? I don't fully understand.
Yeah, so let's say everything goes smoothly, this is approved, you're annexed in, you're starting to work on the actual development plan. Like, what steps do you guys take along the way to make sure that what you're building is safe, clean, and healthy for the people who are living there?
I mean, our view of the environment, again, I'm not an environmental engineer, but again, we do this across the country and have done it very extensively. We believe that there's no issues on the environmental front, period. And so I don't know, maybe Commissioner Height is an environmental engineer. I'm not, but I trust our professionals that have gone to school for many, many years to go get educated about these matters and to go protect us as we go build, $100 million projects on these types of properties and try to bring them back to life. And so our process specifically to this property is to really do no environmental work from here until the time that we buy the property. Before we buy the property, we will go do a final site walk inspection to make sure that all the things that you mentioned in terms of equipment and automobile removal are all handled appropriately. So there's nothing that's occurred between now and that period of time when we have to take title to the property. And then whenever we go to start construction on the property, that's when we'll put our soil management plan in place that is, customary for all of the projects that we do, just as part of our contractors' contract documents in terms of, again, how they handle the different conditions that may arise as they start, excavating the soil and encountering different things that you couldn't have found during the due diligence process, which happens from time to time in construction. You don't know what you can't see necessarily. So that's our general process. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm happy to expand if it didn't.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it sounds like this is part of the very definition of a brownfield, right? Like this is a development that is, as the EPA defines, complicated by the presence or potential presence of a contaminant, and that's what you guys are wrestling with here, and that's what these 4 ESAs are wrestling with. The historic, I think what my fellow Commissioner Height was kind of reacting to is, the photos of the site, regardless of who did what, the photos of the site suggest these oil drums and some other fluids, and the historic use of the site doesn't suggest exactly like a clean sandbox to play in here. And so that doesn't mean it's contaminated, but it does mean it's something to watch for as you go forward. And so I understand the soil management plan is part of this. I'm just curious for other kind of perceived environmental concerns, even if they aren't tested for, if there's anything else that you guys as developers have put in place or thought about to be, conscientious and responsible as you proceed.
No, I mean, if there's stained soil that has been, buried or, compacted over time or whatever that's, unearthed during the construction process, right? Our, soil management plan will identify, hey, you've got, crude oil or some type of gasoline or, other chemical spill that, says, hey, you need to call our, construction materials tester. So, not only will, the group that did the environmental report, perform all those environmental services prior to you buying the property. Typically, we also engage that same firm to provide the construction management services to help administer that soil management plan. And so that they're on site doing their soil inspections and foundation inspections and so forth, daily, right? To just make sure that, none of the issues that, could potentially, arise, aren't glazed over, aren't swept under the rug, so to speak. And so again, they're really another tool that we use both during due diligence and during the construction process to make sure that things are executed in the field in a way that's safe and above board, as you say.
Got it. Thank you, Tyler. A couple questions for Jennifer and maybe Glenn as well here. First of all, just process-wise, I realize this is the annexation. We're a recommending body to City Council in this. When, if at all, would Planning and Zoning see this project again before it is, live and functioning?
If they meet the threshold for a preliminary plat, then it would come back to you. So a preliminary plat is if they're creating more than 3 new lots on the property, that would require approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
That would be the only, so like a site plan, no.
Correct. Site plans are administrative. If they were to make any changes to their concept plan, it would need to go through a process very similar to this that we've seen with previous projects here. But typically it would be once annexed, the general process after annexation is going to be platting and site plan review and public improvement plans. So it just depends on whether or not they meet the threshold for a preliminary plat. Anything to add, Glenn?
Ditto.
Appreciate it. So, and just in your professional opinion on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 100, 100 being 100% likely, how likely do you think it is that we will be seeing this?
I really can't speak to that. That might be a question for the applicant in terms of how they typically, parcel out their projects.
So I should ask Tyler if he wants to see our faces again?
Would love to, but I think that it won't necessarily be in the more than 3 lots context. I mean, the plan here is just to simply have a singular platted lot that houses the entirety of the property.
Noted. Thank you. While you're up there, I will maybe ask a couple other questions here. You've already addressed questions I had that Chairman Poland asked about the sugar mill integration and kind of how you're thinking about that. Just one follow-up on that, which was, there are a few kind of key pillars of the sub-area plan. many of which are also concurrently reflected in Envision Longmont in terms of sustainability, housing, mobility access. I'm just wondering how you think about your development intersecting with those values.
Yeah, great question. I mean, we're certainly advocates of the area plan and everything that is contemplated for, the sugar mill. I think our, small but big piece that, certainly is going to be a central theme of our project is all the improvements that we're going to, provide along Rogers Road in terms of, street widening, sidewalks, street trees. We're burring, the currently existing overhead electric lines that, bound the property today. And so those different elements that will continue to, enhance the overall, pedestrian and community experience are, again, I think the things that we, can have direct control over that will help integrate into a bigger picture vision, a bigger picture plan that gets developed out over the course of, years and if not decades.
Great. And then just to follow up specifically on the sustainability front there, I appreciate the undergrounding. I know that's not a small feat
No.
to pull that off, and I think that makes a ton of sense for the area and for the region, given the wildfire risks. So thank you. Just on the sustainability front here, in terms of kind of green building materials, green infrastructure, drought-resistant plants, sustainable building design, how do you all think about that for the projects that you've done? I know you were just showing representative samples before. I just want to get a sense of your philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that, is on our minds as we go design these projects. We haven't gone through our comprehensive checklist, if you will, of, here's the different things that we're going to, explore and incorporate on this project just because we are, at that step one phase. But, certainly, elements that will, make its way into the design that, again, are environmentally friendly and sustainability focused.
Great, thank you. And I can't remember, there was a lot of information in this packet, including a lot of ESA material. Can you clarify, I didn't see anything about affordable and attainable housing here. I'm just curious kind of where your proposal fits into those values versus market rate. And I realize that any additional housing increases the supply and has kind of a macroeconomic
Sure.
effect. Let's speak just to the specifics of.
Sure, yeah, we understand what the ordinance says and are prepared to adhere to the ordinance.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. That checks a lot of my boxes, as I think one or two of my fellow commissioners have said, like, this makes a lot of sense for the region. This is a dramatic improvement to the property. It sounds like your firm has a lot of experience handling potentially contaminated or contaminated properties. You understand the process, even if you're not an environmental engineer in this. I appreciate you working with us on that. And, I want to be sensitive to my fellow Commissioner Height's kind of concern about the MUE definition there. And I really anchor on the provides flexibility for adaptive reuse piece of that part of Envision Longmont. And just to read that for everyone's benefit, it provides flexibility for the adaptive reuse of existing industrial buildings and for the incorporation of high-density residential and live-work opportunities in close proximity to employment and supporting services in transitional areas. This seems to kind of go smack dab in the middle of that, and I think some projects will make more sense for a true mixed use on site than others, and I appreciate all of the thoughtfulness that the applicants are bringing to the table. I will yield for now.
Thank you. Tyler, follow-up question for affordability. I think I saw on one of your slides that you were anticipating having 4 stories.
Yes.
Does that?
Well, I think one of the slides said that was what was allowed in the MUE zone district, I believe.
Is that with or without affordable housing kicker?
So there are height bonuses for on-site affordable housing. So 4 stories is the maximum height in MUE absent any density or height bonuses.
Okay, so they could go up to 5, let's say, if they had affordable housing.
Yeah, there's a few different opportunities to stack density and height bonuses.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldberg.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, that seems like a great place to consider that extra level or the extra height. Jennifer, I've already shared my opinion on the project and the application before us, but I did want to dive a little deeper on Commissioner Height's concerns. Would you just clarify? I got a little mixed up with the 2021 Phase 2 and 2022 Phase 2. Can you confirm what the proper members of staff have reviewed? Did they review the 2021 Phase 2 ESA that identified contaminants, and did they review the 2022 Phase 2 that did not identify contaminants?
So they reviewed the Phase 1 ESA from 2022 that incorporated as attachments
I
the
see.
2021 Phase 1 and 2021 Phase 2. There was a reference within that particular ESA to the Phase 2 that was done in June of last year.
Yes.
So they would have reviewed that package.
Okay.
That was the original attachment.
And in that attachment, I was trying to scan through it as well. Did that executive summary identify, or did that data confirm that we re-reviewed and did not find the contaminants that the first one revealed?
So based on my recollection, so there's a very clear statement in the executive summary of the Phase 1 ESA from last year stating, they reviewed the document, they reviewed everything, they did the additional limited Phase 2, and that they did not recommend any additional assessments at this time.
Okay. What did we get today specifically that our two expert members of staff were unable to review in time for this hearing?
It would be the full limited Phase 2 ESA that had basically the laboratory results from the groundwater and soil sampling.
Okay, so our kind of expert staff was comfortable approving this with the information that was available before today.
That's my understanding.
That identified that there was perhaps an error in the previous testing, and nothing was identified.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Did you recommend approval of this application, did you and staff give the final thumbs up on the ESA and this section,
So we rely on.
soil section?
Yeah, we rely on our expert members of the Development Review Committee to identify and address any potential issues on sites. It's not just planning, that's on our Development Review Committee looking at these. We've got our engineers from Public Works, we have our public safety folks from Fire who do review any of the hazardous material contamination type issues. So we have a broad range of professional expertise on our Development Review Committee. And they were comfortable. The primary issue that was raised from an environmental standpoint was from the possible wetlands issue, and that's something that the applicant is committed to investigating further.
Okay. This is for you and Jeremy, maybe. Is there a world where we add a condition for approval of the project pending final approval by those members of staff that could not review this update today? Is there a world where we could add a condition like that we get final approval from staff again?
I don't see why not, but I'm going to defer to Planning Director and Legal Counsel.
Hopefully I'm saying what Jeremy's saying, but ultimately, the code does require that we know what environmental risks are, and that basically, we don't want to annex a problem either. So if staff says, oh gee whiz, there's some red flag, which we really doubt there will be, potentially there would have to be some changes.
Okay, Glenn, thank you. Let me just understand that a little bit better. Are you suggesting that with or without any condition by this commission, the experts will end up reviewing this communications we got today and anything incremental, and we'll have the opportunity to give a whoa, pump the brakes? Or are you suggesting if this is something that we want to have happen, we should add it as a condition?
I would agree with both, quite frankly. Yes, it will get reviewed prior to it going to council and find that determination. Ultimately, we have to meet the code, but if it helps the commission, in fact, I think we worked on wording of a condition, potentially, if you want to look at that.
Thanks, Glenn. Yes, I believe we just added a condition on a previous project to confirm that the storage heights stuck to the 6 feet on the fencing that was like dictated in the code. So I think if you don't mind, Jennifer, could you share that proposed language for a condition?
Sure, and this condition really is reflective of our code language as well, and that is basically, we could suggest a condition that the city would require proof of remediation of any contaminations or documentation that any wrecks are no longer an issue as a condition of annexation.
Man, that sounds good. I'll tell you, it sounds consistent with several conditions that we've had in years past where, and maybe more so during Don Burchett's era, you know, when he was spending more time with us. Sometimes we just have a condition B where it was pending final DRC review approval, or, you know, pending any, you know, acknowledging any concerns or feedback from DRC, or something like that. So this, I wonder if, given the kind of recent information we got and our expert engineers not being able to review it in time for this hearing, I wonder if this would be an appropriate time to add this condition that you suggested. Would you read that just one more time?
Sure. City will require proof of remediation of any contamination or other documentation that wrecks are no longer an issue as a condition of annexation. So that could also be review of this phase 2 by our public safety specialists.
Sure.
And if they
Thank you.
find that we're good to go, then we're good to go. If they see there are some problems, then we would ask the applicant to further investigate.
Cool. Another option that I had scribbled down that I dislike more would be the idea of adding some condition that requires, you know, an additional ESA done by a third party or something like that. So I think that the spirit of the condition you outlined meets my goal. Did you have something to say about that? You were touching your mic. You looked like you
I
were
was
getting
going
ready.
to turn off the
Okay, cool.
mic button.
So it's a little bit out of character for me to be the one suggesting a condition or discussing a condition. Very often I find comfort in, you know, what's presented to us and the review by staff and the discussion among our team here. But given the new information, given the concerns from Commissioner Height, I wonder what the rest of the commission thinks about adding that condition that basically says, cool, we get one last look at this and you gotta comply.
Just to jump in here, I mean, that's not the way I read the condition or heard the condition. I heard the condition as not a review and a final approval of the materials that we've performed and have been provided. I heard it as a obligation to go fix contamination without any definition of what the contamination is, and the addressing of any recognized environmental conditions, which we have none right now. So, you know, I'm not sure, you know, what the process is, but I don't think we are in support of that condition as it's currently read in that manner. We're totally fine with a review condition of the materials that we've provided, and happy to talk with your environmental team, our environmental team, happy to go do site walks, whatever we need to do. But I'm very concerned about what that language says in terms of remediating contamination that we don't believe exists and addressing recognized environmental conditions that our reports say don't exist. So does that make sense?
Loud and clear. Jennifer, is it already in the code or in the process in our documents that they would need to address any contaminants or any remediation that is identified, or that they would need to remediate any issues that come up? Are they kind of already accepting that as being an applicant here?
Correct, and I would suggest as, you know, the proof of remediation of contamination, I think it's or acceptance by staff of
Yeah.
documentation.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into a debate about which
Yeah.
test applies and which doesn't. Again, we have professionals that do this for a living, and
Totally.
again, we are very quick to go through, you know, cleanup
Yeah.
programs. I mean, we don't want to take the risk any more than you all don't want to take the risk, I assure you.
Sure.
And so I'm totally fine with making sure that y'all are comfortable. Again, this is the first that, we heard of it this morning at 11 o'clock, that there was environmental questions. We've been working on this for a year.
Sure.
In terms of applications and getting materials in and so forth. So, again, we're not hiding anything. We're more than happy to facilitate discussions or have our team, host a workshop or provide a memo or whatever it may be. But very concerned about, obscure tests and conditions that are very difficult to objectify and determine as complete, incomplete. How do you resolve a dispute, et cetera?
Sure. Jennifer, my last question. Oh, would you read it one last time?
Sure. I was also going to reference the section of code that talks about
Sure. I
environmental site
suspect it
assessment.
sounds similar to that.
So, in terms of environmental site assessment of land to be annexed, subsection 1A basically requires that the owner submit ESAs that we may require. They have done that. Subsection B says we may require remediation by the owner of any contaminated property within the annexation. So that is really the crux here, is if our public safety
Yeah.
experts review this and say, our questions are answered, that pretty much satisfies that. So, we do have some safeguards in our code, and, it could be, the condition could very well just be that city staff reviews the limited phase 2 and accepts it.
Okay.
Which I'm totally comfortable with.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Let me go back to my peers here on the commission and kind of get their thoughts on the condition or not condition, or how that condition might read.
I guess, Jennifer, I do have one question. Given the fact that there are vehicles and stuff currently on this property that still have to be removed at some point, what's the protection for the city if something happens during the removal of those vehicles?
So that same section, so 1502.140, subsection D, does allow us to it does allow us to require environmental assessments additional assessments if they're deemed necessary. So there is that flexibility in there that does allow us to ask for them. So if the vehicles and materials are removed and something wild happens, our staff can say, yeah, we need some more documentation.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Popkin.
Thank you, Chair. You took my first question right out of my mouth, so I appreciate it. Just to respond to the gut check from my fellow Commissioner Goldberg over there, I'm not sure. I like the spirit of where you're going, and I think we need something with a little bit more teeth, frankly. And the reason is, according to the documentation here, there's no reason for them to do any more work based on what they have provided back. They recognize no environmental conditions, and so to comply with the condition, I think, drafted by staff, they just say this stands the test of time, and it might. And so I don't want to necessarily say this is not credible. Just say to meet the additional condition, I don't actually see anything coming from that. And so where my thinking is going with this, kind of maybe along the same spirit of the chair's question before, is that we condition a site walk with staff and the applicant after removal, which I think they would do anyway, and it's just a question of a little bit of coordination, with the potential for staff to have the option to actually add a follow-up ESA request if deemed necessary based on that site walk, and certainly the review of this as a recommending body to City Council. I'm sure that'll happen. So that's kind of where my thinking is, that we think more towards the site walk after removal, because that would be the only other chance where there would be kind of a definitive point where the site conditions might change. Otherwise, the site will, if it's contaminated, it remains contaminated whether they develop or not. Well, hopefully they would clean it up if they're developing. But if they didn't do anything, it would stay in the current condition that it is in. And I don't think any of us want that. So the question is, how do we productively move this forward, recognizing this perception and trying to get past that perception into reality of what is the actual site condition. And the most important site condition, I think, for future tenants and for future community members is going to be, what is the condition post-removal of the equipment, the oil drums, the fluids on site? That's where my thinking's going. Jennifer, Glenn, I'd love your thoughts, and then frankly, Tyler and team there, I'd welcome your reactions to that.
Sure, so through the chair, any future development of this property, the future development review processes, the applicant would be required to go through another pre-application meeting where basically staff, members of the DRC would determine what additional assessments are necessary. So it's an ongoing process. Where
Sorry, when does, I may have missed this when you said it. When does that happen in the process? So we recommend annexation today, city council approves annexation. When were you talking about?
So prior to any application for site plan review or any plating processes, they would go through another pre-application. So before submitting a formal application, they would meet with members of the Development Review Committee who would then take another look of like, okay, we need to see X, Y, and Z. And the code does give us the latitude to request additional environmental assessments if deemed necessary by the appropriate members of the commission.
So you are, so in theory, we do nothing different today. We approve this with no conditions. It goes to city council, they approve it. The developers are happy. We don't have to say any four-letter words. We move forward. And then throughout the next stages of the process, Longmont staff continue to have the option to basically say, okay, we have a potential flag here. We want you to do this at X% design or X stage of the process.
Might not be that level of detail, but it would be, prior to submitting a site plan for review or a plat for review. So we do have that option to ask for things that we may deem necessary.
Got it. Glenn, anything else you want to add on that?
No, I'm just looking at the section of the code, and it does say we can condition the annexation on remediation, which is not unusual in an annexation agreement, which would happen according to how Jennifer laid it out.
Right, and the condition of I see. It would follow Jennifer's process of remediation of anything at any point throughout the process that is necessary
Prior to development.
to meet the health and code standards and safety standards for the planned use, which I'm sure Tyler and team have done many times before in other areas. So that would be a condition that wouldn't inherently add any additional requirements on the applicant. It would essentially just say, if something comes up, you got to remediate this. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Jeremy, are we all on the same page there?
Yes.
Okay. Tyler, how are you thinking of handling, how is your team, would they normally handle a site walk anyway? And kind of, especially with the removal of quite a lot of equipment and barrels, at least from the pictures that we're seeing here, and frankly, it's hard to miss when you drive by. So just, how do you guys normally handle those types of sites?
Yeah, admittedly, this is the first junkyard site that we've built on. So
Cheers.
this is a first for us, but we do have an objective process outlined with our seller partner about what they owe us in terms of us,
Slate, yeah.
noticing them that we're prepared to close and what they owe us in terms of a clean site and all leases terminated, all occupant property removed from the property and clean and non-hazardous conditions. And so all that's very clear. That's all, governed by, call it a final site walk before we spend millions of dollars on a property. We'll obviously walk it, especially in light of the existing circumstances and the plan for removal of all the existing equipment on site. So that's our process. Naturally, like with everything in development, I'm sure there'll be, curveballs along the way with somebody that takes more time to get out or a car that just won't start or won't move. And so we'll have to figure all those things out with them in due course. But this is a first for us. So we feel like we have an objective process outlined with our seller partner, but that'll happen, over the course of a couple months as we kind of prepare to close on the property.
Sure, and you do this poorly once, and it's going to impact your business line down the road, whether it's here or elsewhere. So I realize that you have a vested interest in doing this right, and that's kind of part and parcel of the approach here. I guess just as a last comment, I think we might have a couple options that we can consider if we're on the fence about how to handle this. I just want to acknowledge it's important to make sure that there are no contaminants, and that also there's any perception that there are contaminants is kind of dispelled. And that's really important for public trust in wanting to move in and future tenants and leases that might be signed. So I appreciate my fellow commissioners for going down a lot of these trains of thought. I will yield now to see kind of the pulse of the rest of the commission.
Commissioner Height.
I just want to point out for the record, I'm not an environmental engineer. I did stay at a nice hotel last night. But I am a reformed environmental attorney, and I've looked at thousands of these types of reports. And these two environmental reports don't add up. There are environmental concerns identified a year before this report that says there are no environmental concerns. There's a lawyer out of Texas who opines that the sampling done in the phase 2 assessment earlier was done wrong. I don't have an expert to tell me if that's correct. I don't know. I don't know where this lawyer came to his conclusions or how he came to his conclusions. So for the record, there's a conclusion disconnect. That said, I'm still stuck on the residential issues.
Commissioner Flake.
I tend to agree with a lot of what Commissioner Height said, and I don't have a problem with residential on it. I worry about there being enough at the end of the day that the larger development area to the east is affected. But I too have problems with the application, and I can't support this.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Okay. I remain supportive of the project. I just want to ensure that our proper engineers have had the time to review the latest information. And we know that they have looked at the previous reports. I have Commissioner Height telling me they don't match up. And so I think my goal is just to ensure that staff has the opportunity to give this one last pass before final approval, before it progresses. I don't need teeth. I don't need, I'm not trying to, I respect that staff does their job and they do their job well, and they're going to continue to monitor this, as it moves along. I'm not trying to add anything incremental per se to the site walk. It sounds like staff will continue to do their job properly and be involved to the degree that they need to be. I just feel a little gypped that we had some new information today that the right members of staff didn't get to review, and so that's all I want. I thought that the condition provided by staff, the draft language was easy in line. It reinforced what's in the code already. It was way more eloquent than anything I would come up with, and meets what I'm trying to accomplish, which is one last pass by staff. I don't think it's out to sabotage the applicant. I think the city has recommended approval. They're supporting this project and are kind of encouraging us to approve it. So I don't think this is about setting up the applicant for failure. I don't think the wording suggests that. So generally, I'm favorable to the condition that was outlined by Jennifer.
Okay, Jennifer, can you say that condition one more time?
Sure, and I actually would like to offer a revision to that condition. Something to the along the lines of the commission recommends approval to city council pending acceptance of the phase 2 ESA from 2022 by staff.
I don't know about anybody else, but that sounds like where I would like to go. It's no more further testing, but it's a review of the past testing by city staff. Commissioner Goldberg. Yep.
Thanks, Jennifer. And if they don't accept phase 2 because they harbor, for whatever reason, they decide they too are unconvinced, then what?
At that point, the annexation agreement could be, we could address what's needed as part of the annexation agreement if there are certain things that are identified as far as if public safety wants to see more testing, if there are specific concerns, if they want to see follow-up environmental assessments done as part of
Cool.
platting
So that would be
site
a
plan.
discussion between staff and the applicant. They'd come up with a menu of solutions and find a mutually agreeable one.
Correct.
It's not like if they decline or don't accept it, then this project is canned for a year and they can't make any progress, or they gotta come back and restart. They're gonna work through a solution with staff.
Correct, and we would work through that prior to going to city council, obviously.
Okay. I can be supportive of that. On the off chance that, respecting the likelihood that there's members of the commission that won't agree with me, there's still more time to discuss it, but for the sake of time in our conversation, I think I'll go ahead and recommend conditional approval of the 11386 Rogers Road annexation application, finding that pending the acceptance of the Phase 2 ESA as reflected in PZR 2023-9B.
I will go ahead and I will second that motion. Any further comments? Deliberation? Commissioner Lukash?
Yes, and thank you, Chair, and thank you, fellow commissioners, for the discussion about the environmental assessment. I'm not an expert, so it was interesting to hear all the thoughts about it, and I'm usually on the side of caution, so it's better to be safe than sorry. So I think I'm in favor of this condition.
Commissioner Popkin?
Thank you, Chair. I share a lot of Commissioner Flaig's and Commissioner Height's concerns with this. I think I really want to see the project happen. I want to see it move forward. It's the discrepancy between the two phase twos that is still irks in the back of my head. With or without staff review, I still, you have two different samples, two different tests, and reviews. And I'm not an environmental attorney. I do have an environmental policy degree, and I work in the brownfield space for over a decade. And I have reviewed tens of these, not thousands. So congrats, Commissioner Height. You win on that regard. But it's the discrepancy that still bothers me. And if I was going to the doctor and I got one opinion that said one thing and one opinion from another doctor who said the other, I'd get a third opinion. And I don't fully see that coming through with this condition, but I also recognize that staff has a process to handle this. But I agree with Commissioner Lukacs on the side of caution, but I'm not sure I agree with this condition to get there. And so I want to get to saying yes on this development, and I'm not sure I can with this condition as it currently stands.
Commissioner Goldberg?
Thanks, Chairman. Jennifer, would you clarify, what did you call the team that would review this environmental study?
It's members of our public safety group.
Sure. Did you say two of them are like environmental engineers or something?
Specialists in hazardous materials.
Okay.
Amy Henyon, we have one person who reviews our environmental site assessments, and she has a background in hazardous materials and handling all of these issues.
Cool. Has she reviewed many of these?
I mean, she reviews every ESA that comes in as part of a development application.
Cool. Has she been part of staff for a while?
I would have to defer to people who've been here longer than me.
I see Don shaking his head. That's about as tenured as you get in City of Longmont. Second jab in one night. Is it safe to say that, I feel like just to reiterate what you said was that this person and this team, if they're uncomfortable with the gap in the reports, will have the opportunity to do one of several things. Maybe it's request more a new study, maybe it's revisit the study, maybe it's request new sampling, maybe it's request more information on how we got to the difference between the first and the second one. Like, I think you identified there could be some solutions if they're unsatisfied with the break between the two tests.
I would expect that there are.
Yeah. I guess I kind of see that like going to the third doctor for that third opinion. You know, if I had two opinions that didn't match, I'm kind of considering that as going to get a third opinion to help me, maybe a specialist, we call them.
I would, personally, I would consider our staff reviewer to be that third opinion, frankly.
Yeah, me too. Well, I, of course, share the concerns that every member on this commission has. I think I'll keep my motion on the table, I guess.
Let's see, Commissioner Popkin.
Just a brief response there. So what that third opinion, at least as described, doesn't do is it's not another test, right? It's not another study as an opinion. It's just a review of the two. It's basically a very technical and savvy literature review.
Sure.
Okay, so.
I mean, ultimately, they can make recommendations.
Sure.
As following that review, but.
Do you have any sense of how often, maybe this is a question for Don or for Glenn as well, but anyone who wants to chime in here, how often going through these processes, and Longmont is not shy on its brownfield land, how often this has happened where you've been working through the process and you say, you know what, at this stage we need another ESA. Just welcome back, Don. I just want to know, like, is this a 1 in a million shot that there's another ESA done? Is this you know what, 30% of the time we go back and get an ESA, phase 1 or phase 2, depending on what happens along the way?
Chairman Pullen, Commissioner Popkin, I'm going to ask you to repeat it one more time because it is late and I didn't get much sleep last night. So
not a problem.
If you do that one more time.
Yes, nor did I. Let me try this. When a project is going through the development process, independent of City Council or P&Z Commission, and you're running into issues of potential brownfield situations, how often is a new ESA requested, or a supplemental, or another phase of an ESA requested as part of that due diligence that staff does? Because that's just a process that residents don't have full visibility on, and that frankly we don't have full visibility on. So as someone who's in the weeds there.
Yeah, so when we have a phase 1 that identifies anything that's of concern that would, or there's a recommendation within the report that says that a phase 2 should be done, excuse me, it's required typically by Amy, who is the woman who does the reviews for us, that we get those. So then, under the Land Development Code, and I'm going to cough, excuse me, we have identified that Glenn has the ability to ask for any additional reports that are needed and necessary in order to address the review criteria. So we have the ability to request those as they are identified and needed. The other thing that we have which we have done, for example, I think we just did it with Bond Farm, is if we need to hire a third-party expert to look at something for the city, impartial, we're asking them to take a look at this and give us their professional opinion. We have the ability to do that. That does cost, obviously, money for the city to cover that. But we do have that ability to do that. We've done it for other projects, and I expect that, we may need to do that as we move forward into these areas where we're going to run into contamination and, I would say, challenges that sometimes we may need a third party to look at it just to either confirm staff's findings or to confirm the applicant's findings or another report that was given to us. So it is common that when we identify an issue, to your question, we need a phase 2. We can ask for that, we can get that, and make that a requirement.
Thank you. While you're still here, I'll try not to keep you up too much later. How often in your professional career have you seen a situation where there's a discrepancy between two ESAs conducted at the same level for the same site?
So there was
Like a meaningful, like substantive
Yeah.
discrepancy like this?
Sure. Josh actually might be able to remember this one, but when we were working with the Sandstone Reach and bringing in the property that is catty corner to the northwest of the of Left Hand Brewery. So Boston Avenue, you have the Colorado Materials on the south, and on the north, we brought in at Sunset in Boston, the parcel there. Ms. Bowman identified that the Army Corps had identified that there was a dump on that site, and that was in one of their reports. But yet, when the applicant went through and did their due diligence, they came back and said, we cannot find any proof that there was ever anything on that. And then when we went into it, we couldn't find anything to prove the statement in the Army Corps' report. So, you know, if you can't retrace the steps and come up with the same answer or the same conclusion, then there may have been an error that, you know, as I'm listening tonight, sounds like there could have been an error. Human factor, if you want to give it that. So that's one example where we ran into an issue where we had two different items that were talking about the same property, and when the second report was done, did not come up with the same answer. That's the best one I got for you.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
Tyler, one more question for you, and then I'll yield. You've heard the discussion here. You can read the room. There are clearly certainly a few folks that are a little bit struggling with just the discrepancy. I think everyone thinks that what you're trying to, well, I would say most people here, most of the commissioners think that the proposal makes sense for the area, checks a lot of the boxes that we want to see here. It makes sense for Longmont, frankly. I know that your consultants that you trust and have worked with for years have said there is no concern. But I want to ask you to put on our hat for a second. And so I want to ask you, how would you recommend we handle this?
You know, I think Don makes a good recommendation of if there's the desire or, you know, potential disbelief of our findings that, you know, we certainly stand behind and are very comfortable with as just a massive organization like Cairo. I mean, we don't just take risks for fun.
Yeah.
I mean, we're the complete opposite of that. We're scared of our own shadow in most respects. As Jennifer can attest to in terms of how we just approach risk and details and trying to make sure that every last thing is mitigated and addressed. That's just how we do business. You know, our consultants can attest to that in terms of how micromanagement oriented we are. And so I get that that's all anecdotal and qualitative, so I can appreciate that. And I can appreciate that, you know, perhaps some of the commissioners don't have, you know, the day-to-day experience of building these types of projects and encountering these types of reports and, you know, working through these types of potential issues or perceived issues that, you know, may arise when you see some of these discrepancies. But I think we all can agree that, that there are different caliber of professionals and different caliber of executions amongst consultants or, you know, just professionals in general, right? And so, you know, Don makes a suggestion of potentially having the city engage a independent third-party report to go do a phase 1 or phase 2 or whatever would help get y'all comfortable. You know, admittedly, I think it's a waste of money because I feel very confident, exceptionally confident in what our results have produced because, again, you know, we didn't have to go get a phase 2 done. We didn't because our phase 1 said, hey, there's no recognized environmental conditions. We don't recommend anything moving forward. We said, let's just make sure. So we put our own, you know, groundwater monitoring samples in the ground. We provided, you know, we provided all those test results in accordance with state standard to state certified laboratories that came back in a way that said there's no issues that have contaminants above these regulatory residential levels. And so, you know, that's probably the best idea that I've heard this evening in terms of how to ultimately provide the abundance of comfort that you know some of the commissioners have raised here. Is you know I think a reasonable option.
Appreciate it. Good. Thank you. I'm very glad you had a phase 2 because I think you would have been torn to shreds if you didn't. given the discrepancy in phase one contradicting the phase two that was done previously. So I'm glad to see the phase two. I am now comfortable with the condition proposed, and with, given the discussion and the due diligence that I know our staff will take with this, especially given this conversation, to just make sure that this is checking the boxes and truly is safe, healthy, and in the best interests of Longmont. I have reasonable confidence in the applicant, having just met you all tonight, but you're right, you didn't have to do a phase two. I'm very glad you did. There are two pathways. Either the first one was wrong or the second one was wrong. And I guess at this point, our hope is that the second one is wrong, but we're doing trust and verify here. So with this condition and this conversation, I trust that staff will verify this as the development proceeds. And I hope that the developers will do what's probably in their best interest anyway and making sure that they don't run into issues along the way. So I am comfortable getting to yes at this point.
Yeah, and I'm still comfortable too. None of us are really experts on this. I'm going to make an assumption that Amy is more knowledgeable than any of us on this particular topic, and I am perfectly, it's comfortable for me to hand this back over to her for her to review it, and then if she has anything, she can raise a flag on it, but let her do the review and come up with her own conclusions, so. Any more thoughts, any more questions? Are we ready for a vote? I'm looking through, and I think we're ready for a vote.
Commissioner Height?
Nope.
Commissioner Teta?
Yes.
Commissioner Goldberg?
Yes.
Chair Poland?
Yes.
Commissioner Flagg?
Abstain.
Commissioner Lukacs?
Yes.
Commissioner Popkin?
Yes.
Chairman, that passes 5 approvals, 1 abstention, and 1 no.
Thank you. This item will now be forwarded to the City Council for action. If you're unfamiliar with council procedures and intend to appear before City Council, please contact the Planning Division for further information at 303-651-8330. Commissioner Flagg.
Chair, I need a clarification. I thought we had an amendment, a condition that was going to be added. And we did motion it, we seconded, there was no vote taken?
That was what we voted on is 2023-9B with the condition.
So somehow I missed when we added the commission and voted, the condition and voted on it?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you. I would like to change my vote to no.
So Chair Poland, that still passes 5-2.
Okay, thank you. And I've read the council city action, so we're set on that. Commissioner Goldberg.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make sure, Commissioner Flagg, I just want to put it on the record, just so you understood what the condition was that just passed, it was pending acceptance of the Phase 2 ESA. Just want to make sure you heard that.
Okay. Commissioner Flagg.
I want to assure Commissioner Goldberg I was understanding completely. Thank you.
Okay, we are done with the public hearing items. Next item is final call, public invited to be heard. There's nobody on the list. Nobody's moving forward, so I'll go ahead and close out. Final call, public invited to be heard. Items from the commission. Commissioner Goldberg.
Hey, Glenn. You don't have to attend a meeting to approve the minutes, do you?
No, I think we generally, you can certainly even watch the meeting.
Cool.
Afterwards.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a weird concept to approve if you're not there. But technically it's in our purview to approve. Theoretically, you read them and you've watched the last month's meeting or whatever. Thank you.
Right.
Commissioner Popkin.
Thank you. I just wanted to reflect on the discussion on the last agenda item, and just note that, like, I think it's really important that we all took this seriously. Where this is one, I'm sure y'all have seen this before, even I came here, but we're gonna have a lot of brownfield type properties coming before us in the next few years, I hope. Hopefully we can get increasingly more confident as we work through that process, and I think it's increasingly important that we are scrutinizing these types of applicants and really digging into the material. So I appreciate all of my fellow commissioners engaging in that discussion, regardless of how the vote shook out on that. Truly, I thought it was really, really constructive. And staff for the information that they provided in the process and commentary along the way. Thank you.
I can agree with that. Items from Planning Director Glenn Van Nimmogen.
I just wanted to report what Jennifer mentioned. Last night, the city council reviewed the sugar factory and steam sub-area plan, pointed out that the planning commission did recommend approval of that. They did recommend approval. Basically, it was just a study session, so they didn't give it final approval, but directed us to put it back on a consent agenda for approval. So that'll be happening soon. As we talked about earlier, council agendas are getting rather full, so it's, hopefully that will happen in October.
Okay.
And I guess the next thing is, we are gonna have a vacancy on our planning commission, which is tough, which, anyhow, there is a process out now where we're taking on applications. As you know, council's process is it gets reviewed by the board. We did a little different process where we had a subcommittee look at the applicants and actually interview them, brought it back to the full board, and everybody had input at that point. It'll probably be in November, but I'm just wondering, our thinking is now, just talking it over with Jane, that we do an online meeting with the full commission and whoever the candidates are. And make your recommendation virtually versus having a public hearing on it. I'm sorry.
Whose seat is up?
This gentleman, Mr. Goldberg.
His term limited.
What?
Yeah, man.
There's a limit?
2+ terms, yeah.
Commissioner Goldberg?
Not to put you on the spot.
Glenn, I recall the last discussion after there was kind of that breakout team that interviewed the candidates and then came back to the commission. And I feel like we had like a really weird conversation. It was really uncomfortable. There was people sitting at the dais that were considered and whatever. I think what I'm hearing you say is, let's not do that in public. Let's have a private meeting where we are all interviewing the candidate at the same time. We're hearing the discussion, probably you'd lean on someone to lead it, and then we'd all come armed with the same information. Would we still do the vote on the record like we do in years past?
I believe we'd still do the vote on the record.
Okay, but we'd all be privy to that
But we could do that remotely. We could actually do it that night. Council does want a recording of the interviews to be transferred to them. Here, it's out in, it goes out on YouTube and it goes out to the world. It wouldn't necessarily be that if it was set up as like a study session with an action item, potentially.
Okay, yeah, I have total faith in you and Jane coming up with a solution, but I'm not sure any of the applicants should be sitting or in the room.
I would say, and that was going to be my question, given the fact that the alternates very likely are going to be candidates for the position, would it be just the sitting members then involved on the interview?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. That's a great call out, Chairman.
And the advantage of having a WebEx meeting is we bring in one candidate at a time.
Yep, really smart. Glenn, 2 quick follow-ups. Did City Council revisit their decision on Francis Street annexation?
Yes, I did.
And did they end up falling in line with the with the commission's recommendation?
Yes, they did.
Cool. And then when do you anticipate?
They did approve it. I don't remember what
I
the
think
vote
I was
was.
going to ask you.
5-2? I was looking for Don. Do you know, Jerry?
And when do you anticipate Bond Farm to go to city council? October 10th. Thank you.
It's actually, first reading is coming up next week, and public hearing will be October 10th.
Commissioner Popkin.
Just a brief point of feedback on the interview process last year for commissioners. Food for thought. I know you're all juggling a lot of schedules and timing. My process that I went through was a 15-minute interview with the subcommittee and 10 minutes with council, and that was pretty quick. Just saying, there was time for like one question with city council. So, you know,
Won't be a long meeting.
Yeah. Okay. It's gotta be quick. All right. Just it felt really quick. And yeah. So that anyway, just that thought there. And then just since I'm still getting my bearings on some of these more thornier issues here, when our recommendations go to city council, what's the protocol like for the commission attending, being present, commissioners speaking? I'm just curious, like, where does that fall into? What's I want to just clarify that for, frankly, everyone's sake, given what we just went through, so. What's allowed, what's not allowed, what's recommended?
So, I would say that as the typical lawyer answer, it depends. Annexation is a legislative matter, so certainly Planning and Zoning Commission has made this recommendation.
Sure.
I don't really have any qualms about any individual commissioner coming up to public comment, public hearing on the annexation matter and making a statement, recognizing they're making as a private citizen, not as a member, not on behalf of the commission for annexation. Quasi-judicial, when it's an appeal, is a different story, because that does give me a little bit more heartburn if a commissioner was to come and provide some additional input or testimony that might contradict what was made at the public hearing, that could raise concerns of, ex parte communications that have taken place, or just concerns of the decision-making process. Legislative, good. Quasi-judicial, with an appeal to city council, not so much.
Appreciate it.
Any other? No. Okay. And Glenn, since next month is National Planning Month.
So what it's called?
Should we be prepared maybe October, you were mentioning maybe October 24th? We might be invited to the proclamation?
It's really up to the mayor. So it's not really a staff thing. So we put in a request for a proclamation, we write it, and then they tell us when they're gonna do it. So we just don't know at this point.
Okay. I would prefer the 24th rather than the 10th.
That would be awkward with Bond Farm.
Yeah.
I think that's appropriate, actually.
Well, okay.
My guess is, that they'll be avoiding it as well, so.
Okay. Just keep us informed, because
Yeah.
if it is the October 10th, it'll be before our next meeting, so.
Right, and yeah, it'd be great if everybody could come. You get a picture.
Get a pick of
Council.
city council.
Be great for our outgoing commissioner.
What can we expect in meetings for October?
I think we're not seeing anything in October at this moment.
Really?
Yeah. Thanksgiving.
Okay.
But that could change.
Okay,
A few moving pieces out there.
Okay, just keep us informed. Any other items? If not, we are in adjournment.
Great, thank you very much.